Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robb executed. Robb groggily opened his eyes, looking right at the back of Samwell Tarly's head. He wasn't sure how he knew that it was Sam's, but there was certainly something distinctive about the big man. The way he worked with an anxious pace, the way he muttered to himself both criticism and encouragement. Perhaps Robb's subconsciousness had recognized the voice as it encouraged him to drink or rest. Robb groaned, rubbing his head. On pure reflex, he tensed his right shoulder and felt a wave of pain come from that side, causing him to choke on pain. Your Grace, Sam said, turning around and running back over to the bed. What's wrong? My shoulder, Robb grunted, trying and failing to look at where the pain was coming from. His right shoulder and breast was wrapped in clean white bandages. There was now a throbbing, dull pain that was coming from around his pec. Robb then realized that he was only dressed in a pair of breeches. What's happened? You were attacked, Your Grace, Sam answered gravely. The assassin stabbed you and we believe tried to kill Torrhen as well. Is he alive? Robb asked, going to stand before the pain radiating from his chest and shoulder forced him back down. Sam laid a firm hand on his good shoulder. He's fine, my lord. He the queen, Greywind. They're all fine, Sam replied. The assassin killed 2 sentries on the edge of the encampment. Brian went to check it out and left Patrick Mallister to guard you. The assassin knocked him out. He's still unable to speak due to the damage on his throat, but he's alive. He then drugged your wife and Direwolf with laced food, Sam explained, speaking quickly and without any unnecessary detail. What we believe happened is that he was attempting to kill Torrhen with sweet sleep, but was unable to administer the right amount when you arrived. Robb nodded slowly, the memory coming back to him. He had arrived, and seeing no guard, had drawn his dagger and entered the chambers. Marguerite and Greywind had been fast asleep, and thinking back on it now, Robb remembered seeing a plate of food near Marguerite and a large platter with a bloody bone next to Greywind. The assassin, a brown-haired man with a female-looking face, had a vial in one hand and was standing over Torrhen's crib. Robb's sudden appearance had caused him to drop the vial. He had then drawn his dagger, and as the two fought, the man stabbed Robb in the chest, and as Robb fell into unconsciousness, he vaguely remembered striking the man in the side with his dagger. What happened after? Robb asked. Jon and I were coming to see you when we found what had happened. As I worked on you, Jon made sure that the prince and the queen were still alive. That's when Lord Tyrion arrived with his squire and his sworn sword. Those two had the assassin between them. Sam explained quickly. Lord Tyrion got the assassin to give up his poison by poisoning him with his own dagger. I was then able to make an antidote. You saved me, Robb said. Thank you. I owe you a great debt. Sam gave Robb a humble smile. I am a maester in training, my lord. Saving lives is what I'm learning to do. Also, there is no debt between friends.
You saved me,
Robb said again firmly. I promise I will repay that debt. Someday, my lord, Sam relented, knowing that it was a lost cause to persuade Robb not to repay his help. What happened to the assassin? Robb asked. Who sent him? Sam's smile disappeared. I gave him the anecdote to make sure it was the right one. It was, but Jon told me not to wrap his arm. Lord Tyrion had cut into a vein to make sure the poison got through the body quicker. He was bound to bleed out. That's when your father and Eddard Stark arrived. At this point, Robb felt his throat become scratchy and began to cough. Sam stopped talking and helped Robb sip some lemon water. The sourness of the lemon helped cut through the dryness of his throat. The water was also amazingly cool and refreshing. Sorry, Robb apologized. Please continue. Jon and Lord Tyrion explained what had happened, and then Darren, Captain Darren, Master Darren. Robb helped. Master Darren, Sam continued, cut the man's throat. He knew who the man was, and such didn't need him alive. The assassin was Lysan Elmar, the spy master for the Golden Company. Robb felt his blood turn to ice. There's no mistake? Sam shook his head sadly. Sarah Garland and Sarah Brendan met Sarah Barristan, Selmy, and another man named Grey Worm in the neutral zone, and showed them the head, he said. They promised to investigate. That was a week ago. I was out for a week, Robb said loudly. The poison was fast-acting, my lord, Sam said grimly. It had a good hold on you when Jon and I arrived. I've been by your side every day and night. You finally muttered in your sleep yesterday. I thought we were losing you the day before that. Robb groaned and ran a hand over his face. Okay, so the Targaryens know what we know. Sam shrugged. Not exactly. The two knights presented the head, but only said that he had attempted to kill you. They did not say what your current condition was, so as to prevent another attempt. Good idea, Robb muttered. What else? Sam thought for a moment. With the Queen recovering for a day, Lord Stark, your father, took control of the army. He's currently in a council of war. He's been having them ever since the attack. Robb nodded. Well, I can't do anything from here, can I? He said, attempting to get up. Sam went to make him lay down, but Robb stopped him with a look. Sam, I owe you for all you've done, but I am not going to fight a battle. I am merely going to talk with my council. I believe I am well enough to do so. Sam hesitated. My lord, I still think you need another week or more to recover. Robb sat up in bed, swinging his feet onto the ground. His vision swam for a moment, before he blinked a lot, correcting his vision. He nodded to a chest. Get me a shirt, please, and grab my sword. You said you wouldn't fight, Sam said accusingly, digging out a shirt. It's to help me stand. Robb answered as Sam pulled the short over his one good arm, leaving the other one tucked close to Robb's body. After his shirt was on, Robb clutched his sword and used it as a cane. With Sam by his side, ready to help, he took a few wobbly steps. You're remarkably good at this, Sam noticed. I nearly had my back broken in the reach, Robb grunted, sweat breaking out on his forehead. I was in considerable more pain then. Call this unfortunate practice. Together, the two men made their way out of the sectioned-off chambers and right into the middle of a war council. All of Robb's commanders were dressed for battle, with his father sitting on one end of the table and Margaery on the other. His father shot to his feet when he saw Robb. Robb, he said worriedly. Robb shook his head, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Sam moved away for a second to grab a chair and place it next to the Queen. Margaery held his arm firmly as Robb sat down. Whatever the others had been talking about had quickly died the moment Robb entered. Robb sucked in a breath, leaned his sword against the table, and kissed his wife's hand, giving her a brave smile before addressing his council. He could see that all of his commanders were relieved to see him up and walking. Sam was standing awkwardly against the wall in case Robb needed him. Sorry for my abrupt entrance, my lords. Robb apologized. It's all right, Your Grace, Lord Caron said happily. I think I speak for us all when I say it's good to see you back on your feet. Aye, and looking like a wobbly deer at that, Robb joked grimly. Samwell has caught me up with what has happened. He nodded to his father. Thank you. His father nodded back. Of course, Your Grace. Please, resume your conversation, Robb said. Nothing worth mentioning, my lord. Ser Brynden grunted, just talking over various plans in case battle becomes inevitable. How many men do we have? Robb asked. 77,000, Lord Tarly answered. I brought some 20,000 reachmen from the west, and Sir Jon Fossaway brought his own small host. There's also the Company of the Rose. Darren Stark added. 4,000 battle-hardened warriors. We also have 30,000 Velamen, 8,000 Rivermen, 6,000 Stormlanders, and another 1,000 Northmen. Father finished. It's a sizable host, to be sure, but the Targaryens have one of their own. Almost 70,000. Margaery explained, looking at Robb. 8,000 Unsullied, almost 20,000 Selzards, 30,000 Dornish, and the Dothraki Goldcloaks and Crownlanders combined for around 9,000. How were we able to get such numbers? Robb asked. Alec Reed, my spy master, was able to get some fairly accurate estimates. Darren answered. He's rarely wrong. There's also their dragons, Garland commented. I have Lord Tyrion and my brother Willis on that problem, Margaery said, knowing what Robb's next question would be. They'll come up with ways to beat them, should it come to that. I fear it may, Father said grimly. King's Landing has gone silent. Every messenger we've sent has been turned away at the gate to the city. We've stopped food shipments, but to no effect. As of right now, they're the enemy. Edmure finished. Robb tapped the armrest to his chair, thoughtfully, staring at the table as he thought quickly. He had to believe that Daenerys had no part in his assassination. The two of them had worked so hard to complete the treaty. If anyone wanted Robb dead, it would be Aegon. He was also the one who controlled the Golden Company. With every road that Robb went down, it all ended with the same conclusion: Aegon. If you're wondering who tried to kill you, my lord, the Queen, Lord Tyrion, and Lord Willis have come up with some good arguments for Aegon. Lord Forrester said, as if reading Robb's mind. From what the Queen has said, the Targaryen woman doesn't seem like the type to want you dead. I don't think she is, Robb said slowly. But this attack still came from the capital, and right now, we will treat everyone there as a threat. The message was clear. Even if Daenerys wasn't the type to try to have Robb assassinated, there's no certainty that she hadn't sent the assassin. It was clearly the best option right now to treat everyone who is not their ally as their enemy. What would you have us do? Father asked. Continue to plan and strategize, Robb ordered. Father, until I am back to full strength, I am giving you main command of the army. Father nodded seriously. Of course. When I am able to ride again, I will summon Daenerys to the neutral ground, and will speak with her there. 2 weeks is ample enough time to find out who wants me dead. Robb continued. If she refuses to hand over the criminals, then battle is our only course of action. Line break. How are you feeling? Margaery asked, following Robb back into their quarters after the meeting. Sam thankfully allowed the couple to have a moment alone. He waited outside in the main room. Surprisingly, not as bad as Bitterbridge, Robb answered, sitting on the edge of his bed as soon as he was able. Margaery sat on his good side, resting her head on his shoulder. Where's Torrhen? Robb asked. With Sansa and Mira, Margaery answered. He's fine. He was groggy, just like me, but the Maesters have checked on us constantly at the behest of your family and mine. I was more worried about you. Thankfully Sam was next to you the entire time. I owe him a lot for what he's done. Robb agreed. The other Maesters believe that he should receive his gold link for simply saving you, Margaery said. The man has a talent. Perhaps we found our Grand Maester. Robb chuckled, resting his head on Margaery's. I'm sorry I worried you. You worried us all, Margaery said, sniffling a little to hold back tears. You're not allowed to die. I swear I'll do my best to not do that, Robb said, laughing quietly. Margaery slapped him lightly on the arm. Don't joke with me, Robb Stark, she scolded. Robb kissed her on the top of her head, which seemed to lessen her fire a little. I swear I won't ever leave you and Torrhen. You have my word.
Margaery looked up at him.
The two kissed deeply. I'm going to hold you to that, Margaery said quietly when they broke apart. I know, Robb said, resting his head back on hers. Thank the gods for my father. Margaery nodded slightly. I see where you get it. I haven't seen many war councils, but I've never seen someone control a room like your father. Certainly not my own father. You know I also owe my life to Tyrion, now that I think about it. Robb said after a moment, not mentioning the fact that Margaery had mentioned her father and not broken into tears. I know, Margaery said. I haven't released him from the limitations you placed on him, but Willis has been keeping the man company as they've worked through books and books of dragon lore. They've gotten along famously. I'm sure Tyrion enjoys having someone who matches his intellect. Robb grunted. I guess there's nothing to do now, but wait. Wait until I'm healthy enough to take the field. If it really was Aegon, Margaery mused, do you think Daenerys will give him up? He controls a large portion, if not the majority, of her army. If I remember right. Robb shook his head. I guess that's a question that'll be answered when we meet. Do you think she'll answer your summons? Margaery asked. She'll either want to apologize directly to me and hand over the criminals, or look me in the face and refuse. Robb sighed. Either way, this won't end well for the wolves and dragons. An alliance is no longer an option. Is it? Margaery said, already knowing the answer. The lords won't stand for it. Not after someone in their camp tried to kill me, Robb said. Even if Daenerys hands over the men responsible, that'll only postpone the inevitable. War, Margaery said simply. Death, Robb agreed. Rabba Seketav. It had been a few weeks since the attack, and Sam had kept the king confined to his quarters, a decision firmly supported by Margaery and his father. Finally, the young wolf was allowed out of his tent and could walk freely amongst his men. The young maester's precaution hadn't been for Robb's safety, but his health. The poison Sam had extracted from him was not a usual poison that assassins used. It was a combination of substances that was not usually put together, and Sam wasn't sure how much it had affected Robb. The Targaryens still refused to answer any messengers from the Stark camp. Robb's father continued to send a messenger every day at noon, and every day they had been met with firm refusal. It was beginning to annoy Robb, who was beginning to believe that Daenerys wouldn't be willing to give up the guilty party, if in fact she had found out who it was. If the Targaryens continued to refuse him, then he would demand their presence tomorrow. They will face him eventually, and he wanted to give them the chance to fix their mistake before Robb made them pay. "Your Grace," Brienne outside of Robb and Marjorie's private chambers. "News from King's Landing." Robb looked up from his task. "Come in, Brienne." The large woman entered, looking a little uncomfortable with being in the royal couple's quarters. It's not that it was filled with luxuries, but a person's quarters, especially commanders, were a private place. "You said there was news from the capital?" Marjorie asked, rocking Torrhen in her arms. Brienne nodded. "Lady Daenerys would like to meet His Grace and 2 of his commanders on neutral ground," she said. "She requested that you take no more than 10 guards." Robb was already walking over to where his wardrobe was. "Get me Garland and the Blackfish," he ordered. "Put together a guard for me, include yourself in the 10. Brienne nodded and strode off to do the king's bidding. Martha waited till the commander of the elite guard was gone, before she spoke up. "Surely your father can take care of this," she offered. Robb smiled at her while he put on a new shirt and jerkin, careful of his shoulder and chest that was still wrapped in bandages. Although Sam no longer was by his side every moment of the day, he checked on Robb 3 times a day, another thing firmly supported by Marjorie. Robb shook his head. "I am king. I have to take care of this," he said. "Besides, as much as I love spending time with you and Torrhen, I've begun to feel like a caged tiger." Marjorie nodded quietly. "You do not mean to say that you have had your fill of your son and wife." "I could spend 1,000 years with you both, and never grow tired," he promised sweetly, kissing his wife and son on their heads. "But someone tried to kill me, and I want answers. If it took the Targaryens this long to respond, then they should have the answers we seek. You better return," Marjorie ordered sternly before pulling Robb in for a deeper kiss. The young wolf smiled and returned the kiss with just as much passion. The couple were interrupted when Olivar cleared his throat from outside the room. Robb grinned and called out, "I'll be right there, Olivar." Marjorie let go of her husband and watched as Robb swept out of the room, grabbing his cloak and sword as he left. He had a spring in his step, obviously excited that he could ride and take command again. Robb was never one to sit still, not when there was work to do. Outside the tent, Robb's faithful squire stood holding the reins to Wesley, the charger that Willis had gifted to Robb. The horse was as pale as bone, looking almost like an albino save for his blonde mane and blue eyes. Robb had ridden him only a few times, but he could say confidently that Wesley was the best horse Robb had ever ridden. Every command was obeyed without hesitation, and even in the muddy trail that snaked through the camp, the beast had no trouble. "Olivar," Robb greeted kindly. Olivar, along with Ser Perwyn, had stayed by his side while the rest of House Frey had abandoned Robb. With a slight start, the Northern King realized that Olivar was the last remaining Frey male. The rest were either dead or sent to the wall for the part they played in the Bolton Rebellion. The young wolf knew immediately that Olivar would be a great lord of the crossing. He was faithful and honest, and had been nothing but loyal to Robb throughout the entire campaign. Robb promised himself then and there that, when issues with the Targaryens were settled, he would knight the boy and give him his ancestral home. "Your Grace, we're ready," Brienne said, riding up to the pair. Riding next to Brienne was Garland and Sir Brynden, both of whom were armed and armored. The same went for the 9 men behind them. Robb was the only one who didn't look ready for a fight, but at least he had Claude at his side. The king hauled himself into the saddle, minding his injured shoulder. He nodded to his good brother and uncle. "Brienne, has my father been told?" Robb asked. The warrior woman shook her head. "No, my lord." "Olivar," Robb began to say. "I will, your grace," Olivar responded, before Robb could finish the question. The Northern King smiled at his squire. "Thank you, Olivar," he said before snapping his reins and riding south. When the Targaryen party came into view, Robb resisted the urge to grip his sword. He knew that Daenerys would see the act as hostile, and Robb wanted to keep things as civil as possible. He had already mentally prepared himself to throw down the gauntlet if it came to it. Not only had they tried to kill him, but Torrhen as well, and Robb would wade through a river of blood before he allowed his son to be attacked without repercussions. Daenerys was at the head of the other group, Ser Jorah and Ser Barristan at her side. Behind her, Dothraki milled around, glaring at the approaching Starks. The young queen sat easily on her mount, her face a mask of neutrality, not giving away her emotions. When Robb was close enough, he brought his horse to a stop, nodding to the girl. "Daenerys," he said briefly, forgoing the politically polite term of my lady that he had usually used. As much as he tried to stay calm, he could barely contain his anger. It was weeks of pent-up anger, and he tried not to let it control him, but he was having trouble. Something broke slightly on Daenerys' face when Robb addressed her, but it was quickly covered again. She nodded in return. "Robb." Robb gazed over her group, noting how none of Aegon's companions were with her. He looked back at her. "If you have not called me here to tell me who amongst your allies tried to have me killed, then you've wasted my time." Daenerys shifted slightly in the saddle. "I am truly sorry for what happened to you, but my betrothed and I have taken the last few weeks to look into the attempt on your life. Please believe me when I say we found nothing. If you are trying to tell me that the spymaster of the Golden Company went rogue, then you'll understand my disbelief." Robb scoffed. "For a company renowned for its discipline, they have fallen remarkably short of the mark. If you have something to say, speak plainly, my lord," the Mother of Dragons demanded, not happy that Robb had insulted men under her banner. Robb leaned forward, crossing his arms over the pommel of his saddle. "Fine, let's speak openly. One of your men tried to kill me. He had the evidence on him. Now I'm not sure about you, my lady, but I want to find the person or people that contrived to see me torn from my family, so that I may acquaint the edge of my blade with their neck." Robb all but growled. "I am not stupid. I know who the Golden Company owes their loyalty to. Aegon or Conington sought to see me dead, and I want to know." The look of neutrality that Daenerys had worn cracked in response to Robb's angry words. But the Northern King didn't care. He had faced down Tywin Lannister while his own bannermen betrayed him. The girl playing queen didn't scare him, nor did her dragons. He knew the stories of Balerion, Meraxes, and Vagar and what they were capable of. The dragons Daenerys held in the Godswood were no bigger than the horse Robb currently rode. "You dare sit here in front of me and question the integrity of my family and counselors," she hissed. "We've been nothing but cordial to you and your army of traitors." Robb raised an eyebrow. "You've been cordial, as have the two knights at your side. The same cannot be said for your betrothed or his hand. It seems to me that one or both are still bitter about the part my father had in the rebellion more than 20 years ago." "I can't imagine why," Daenerys snapped. Robb laughed mockingly. "Daenerys, even you have admitted that the actions of your father were heinous, and that's putting it lightly," he replied instantly. "But that is off topic. I will give you but 2 more days, and that is being generous, to turn over the guilty party. If my deadline is not met, then I will have no choice than to treat you and your allies as enemies that must be dealt with." Daenerys recoiled in her saddle as if she had been struck. "You would throw away everything we've worked towards?" Robb stood in his stirrups, his hand gripping the pommel of his sword, threatening to draw it. Since he arrived, he had spoken in a dark tone that had gradually grown bitter and angry. Now, when he spoke, it was a bellow that portrayed the rage that had been festering since he had learned of the attempt on his life and his son's. "Someone tried to kill me, Daenerys. They tried to kill my son, a child. I'm sure you've noticed, my son is not a fire-breathing beast like yours. I will kill anyone who tries to tear me from him and my wife." During Robb's rant, Jorah and Barristan had nudged their horses forward in defensive positions in front of their queen, both with hands on their swords. As the two knights moved forward, as did Garland and Ser Brendan, but both men were stopped at a gesture from their king, who regained his seat, his face red. "I would never try to harm Torrhen," Daenerys began before Robb cut her off. "Do not speak his name." Robb snapped savagely. "You have 2 days. Turn over the guilty party, or leave Westeros. If you defy me, I will have you forcibly removed, and you will not enjoy how I do it." "Is there nothing I can do to keep fighting from breaking out?" Daenerys asked sadly. Robb glared at her. He was sure that she had nothing to do with his attempted murder. But she was still a Targaryen, and Robb had been unable to keep his anger in check any longer. 20 years ago, the Starks purged the land of dragons, he said coldly. I will see it done once more if need be. If you had any hope for peace, then you will not force my hand. And with that, Robb Stark and his companions turned and left the Targaryen party alone, the young wolf's deadline starting. Line break. Daenerys watched sadly as Robb and his men rode away. She hadn't expected the Northern King to unleash on her like he had, but she couldn't find it in herself to blame him. If someone had tried to kill her or one of her children, then she would also do everything in her power to see the culprits brought to justice. Will Robb really fight us? She asked quietly. The Starks are not known to lie, Jorah answered solemnly. If Robb Stark says he'll have us removed by force, then that's exactly what he'll do. Can we beat them? Maybe. Sarah Barristan answered. Lord Robb is known to be a master strategist. But is that true? Daenerys asked. He's here. Tywin is not, Jorah answered bluntly. As much as I hate to admit it, Stark seems to have made the same connection that we have. Daenerys could only nod. As soon as Sarah Barristan returned with news of an attempted assassination on Robb and his child, she had been sick to her stomach. Then the old knight had revealed that it had been Lysan O'Mara, a member of the Golden Company, who had been caught in the act. Unfortunately, Daenerys' mind instantly accused Aegon and Conington. The Sellsword Company owes their allegiance to them, not her. Of course, Aegon and Conington immediately began to point the finger at others who could have set up the assassination, always bringing back up the fact that Lysan was a sellsword and followed money. Daenerys wasn't looking at her master of coin, but she was sure that he was biting tongue as his former comrade was disgraced. Alone in her room after the meeting, Daenerys and Barristan had a very honest conversation. Flashback. There's no one else who could have tried to have Robb killed, is there? Daenerys said, gazing at her untouched food. The old knight rested a hand on the hilt of his blade, as he stood across from her. I'm afraid not, my lady. Stannis is dead. Same with Bellen, I believe, in the War of Five Kings. Lord Robb is the only one to still have his crown. Aegon suggested the Lannisters, Daenerys pointed out, looking up at her protector. Sarah Barristan shook his head. Lord Tyrion is a capable man to be sure, according to Varys, but he has no power or money. The last of his family's strength is holed up in Casterly Rock, he explained. To a sellsword, that's a bad investment. What about the Dornish? Daenerys asked. I don't think so, my lady. The Barristan answered. Prince Doran was emphatic when he spoke up. The Dornish are very against the killing of children. As anyone should be. Daenerys sighed. Should I be ashamed that my mind keeps going back to Aegon and Conington? It's logical, unfortunately, Barristan replied. Daenerys tapped the table. In her mind she tried to come up with some answer. Someone else to blame other than the pair who controlled more than half her army, but she just couldn't. Robb Stark was Aegon's direct competition, and he certainly didn't hide his disdain for the Northern King. But Aegon would never order the death of a child. Not after what happened to his mother and sister. All that left was Conington. Flashback. It seems we have 2 days. Careers. Daenerys said after leaving her memories behind. Khaleesi, Jorah said. You know as well as I that there's only one man who did this. Daenerys didn't have to look behind her to know that Barristan was in agreement with the Northern Knight. Conington was the only logical answer, but she knew that Aegon would never give up the man who had raised him. Aegon won't give him up. Daenerys answered sadly, turning to face the two men. That leaves only one course of action. There has to be another way, my lady, Septa Barristan said. You heard him, Daenerys all but snapped. I will not go into exile, not again. If Robb Stark approaches the city with an army at his back, then we will defend ourselves. Sarah Barristan gazed at the queen for a long moment before bowing his head, accepting her decision. It was not one that Daenerys enjoyed giving, but she had no choice. Robb and her own advisors had backed her into a corner, and all she could do now was respond to whatever Robb approached with. She would respond with fire and blood. Robb Septiflav. At the Battle of Harrenhal, Robb had thought that the battle had been the largest display of his forces. Looking over the battlefield now, he was amazed at what he saw. The men of the Reach and Stormlands spread out to his right, marching steadily towards the golden skulls and red suns that hung over the ranks of men that protected the River Gate, the King's Gate, and the Lion's Gate. To Robb's left were the forces of the Vale, the mounted knights looking resplendent in the shining silver armor and their flowing cloaks. They moved slowly towards the more chaotic-looking horde of cavalry and footmen. The remainder of the sellswords and Dothraki, if Robb was to guess, Lord Royce would have a tough time taking the Dragon and Iron Gates. The Northern King was located behind the men of the Riverlands under the command of the Blackfish. They faced off against the deep ranks of the Unsullied. Daenerys had deployed her best warriors to protect the Gate of the Gods. If Robb was able to break through the eunuchs, then he had a straight shot through the city to the Red Keep. Father and Jon, commanding the Company of the Rose, were next to his forces across from the Old Gate, which was defended by men of the Crownlands and the City Watch. Although the enemy had nearly twice their number, Robb felt confident the sellswords would break through. Robb himself was surrounded by the men of the North, the smallest force in his army, but perhaps the most battle-hardened. These were men who had fought with him at Riverrun, with Jon in the Westerlands, at Harrenhal and Highheart. There were no others that Robb wanted with him. His wife was a Tyrell, and he was related to the Vale and Riverlands by his parents' marriage, but he was still and always the king in the north. Robb, his father, Lord Tarly, Ser Brynden, and Lord Royce had pored over a map of the city the last 2 days, devising a plan to take the city. The group of strategists had been able to come up with a plan to defeat men, but it had been Willis and Tyrion who had truly played the biggest role, as they had come up with a few ways to take care of the 3 dragons. The 2 men had gotten along famously, and although the imp was Robb's prisoner and all by name, he didn't seem to mind all that much, so long as he had his wine, books, and his intellectual conversations with Willis. All the king in the north could do now was wait. His commanders were more than capable of executing the plan, without him needing to run riders back and forth. Robb and his men were merely reserves, observers of the battle, really. Horns went up from all over the battlefield, almost as one. Blocks of men from Tarly's host began to march forward, supported by mounted knights. Hundreds of green-clad men, carrying bows and crossbows, jogged behind them. Robb had never fought with the Lord of Horn Hill, and he would be lying if he said that his expectations weren't more than a little high. He was up against the might of Dorne and most of the Golden Company, along with a dragon if Robb's guess was right. Aegon would never allow his father figure to fight alone. The men of the Vale moved forward at a much slower pace than their friends on the other side of the city, but that was for a reason. Eddard Stark, leader of the Company of the Rose, had been an advisor in Robb's war meeting. He knew sellswords better than anyone else in the tent, and he was positive that Royce could destroy them if he did things a certain way. His cousin's sellswords began to fire upon Crownlanders and gold cloaks. The company had only a few hundred archers, but their job was only to soften the men's resolve and to whittle down their numbers. Robb wasn't sure who was commanding the Old Gate, but whoever it was would have the toughest job. The gold cloaks, according to Robb's father, were not the most able warriors, and they made up more than half of the defenders at that gate. "My lord, it seems Ser Brynden is preparing for his attack." Lord Gregor noted. The Lord of Ironrath was right, of course. Rolling through the ranks of Riverlanders were 5 catapults, each slightly smaller than normal. They weren't big enough to break down walls, but against the tightly packed ranks that the Unsullied liked to fight in, they would cause damage and break up the ranks. Robb knew that it was hopeless to expect all of his forces to receive such weapons, but against the Unsullied, Ser Brynden was the one who needed them the most. "The men are ready?" Robb asked, resisting the urge to look around him. "As ready as they'll ever be," Forrester replied easily. "You can't train for something like this." Robb smiled grimly. "I've heard Brandon Hawker brag that his brother can hit the eye of a gnat. Let's hope he's just as good with a much larger target." Line break. Daenerys, the Queen of King's Landing, looked out from over the Gate of the Gods at the Stark army arrayed in front of her. When she had accepted the fact that war was inevitable, she had taken a closer look at her forces, and her confidence grew as she did. She knew that Robb had a sizable force, but not even he would be able to match the Targaryen host. She was wrong. So wrong. The Dornish and the Golden Company to the west and south looked able to stand up to the enemy. But Daenerys had her doubts everywhere else on the battlefield. The further she looked east, the more concerned she got. She even worried about the sellswords in Dothraki protecting the Dragon and Iron Gates.
Khaleesi.
Ser Jorah greeted, as he got closer. The northern knight was ready for battle, and had a gold cloak hanging from his shoulders, which looked odd in comparison to his dark armor. "Tajora," Daenerys said, gesturing to the battlefield. "This is not at all what I expected." Jorah shook his head. "This is not what any of us expected, my lady," he answered grimly. "They have at least 30,000 reachmen, far more than we thought, and we also weren't prepared for the Company of the Rose." "Another sellsword company?" Daenerys asked curiously, looking over at where the banner of the White Rose snapped in the window. "I thought they were all with us." "It seems not," Jorah sighed. "This does not bode well for us. The Company of the Rose is the second biggest company in Essos, and is equal to the Windblown and the Company of the Cat." Drogon's scaled head nudged Daenerys' shoulder, as if to remind her that he was still with her. The Mother of Dragons smiled, and ran her hand over the dragon's snout. The Black Dragon and Rogol were both sitting over the gate, watching over the battle. Daenerys hoped that their presence would inspire courage in her men and fear in her enemies. "Do not forget, Septa, we have dragons," Daenerys said with a slight smile. "That should even out the odds." Jorah raised an eyebrow, but kept his mouth shut. "With your leave, Khaleesi, I have to attend to the eastern wall. The Knights of the Vale are arrayed against the Dothraki, and they will need reinforcements." "What about Sarah Baristan?" Daenerys asked, looking towards the old gate where the old knight commanded the men of the Crownlands and the majority of the gold cloaks. Ser Jorah grimaced. "There's nothing I can, my lady. The furthest east you look, the more the battlefield is not in our favor. The city watch is spread too thin. We can't even support Prince Oberyn or Lord Conington." A roar echoed over the city. Aegon was fearsome to behold, in pitch-black armor and cape. His helm had a red dragon rearing up, its wings spread. Whatever images Daenerys had of her brother Rhaegar, Aegon looked the part. He soared over King's Landing atop Viserion. He would do his part to break the men of the Reach. "I believe my betrothed has that well in hand," Daenerys said. Their conversation was again interrupted by the sound of hundreds of war horns. The sound erupted from the massed ranks of Reachmen, as the enemy line began to tramp forward. Daenerys took a moment to stare at the enemy, unable to do nothing but admire their discipline. Horns sounded from the Dornish and the Golden Company, as well as shield walls were formed, and archers ran into position. "It seems our discussion is at an end," Daenerys said. "Stay safe." Ser Jorah bowed. "You as well, Khaleesi." Line break. Eddard. Ned sat mounted next to Jon and Darren. The men of the Company of the Rose stood in ranks before them. Loose ranks of archers stood slightly in front of the rest of the small host, raining down arrows on the men of the Crownlands. On either flank were hundreds of mounted sellswords. As Ned had come to expect, the men of the Company of the Rose had great discipline. Ned could make out a mounted warrior in white armor, and a white cape among the ranks of spearmen and archers. Ned had a feeling that he knew who it was, and he hoped that he wouldn't have to fight his friend. He had too much respect for him. "Father, Sir Brynden is starting his attack," Jon grunted, staring north. Ned looked over at where the men of the Riverlands were drawn up, across from the dark-clad spearmen with the odd spiked caps. The Unsullied were said to rival the great Giscari legions, and now that legend would be tested. Ned remembered that one of Brandon's favorite stories was of the 3,000 Unsullied who defended Qohor from the Dothraki horde. The small catapults fired. Ned followed the boulders as they flew through the air and smashed into the eunuchs. They did all they could, but even their great bravery and fortitude could not withstand a boulder. Gaps formed in their shield wall as the boulders took out a couple of men. Ser Brynden, ever the opportunist, already had his archers sending a volley of arrows, plunging into the breaches, cutting down more men. The Unsullied quickly closed ranks again, weathering the second volley. Ned couldn't help but be impressed by their discipline. Most men would have at least wavered in the face of catapults and archers, but not the Unsullied. "They certainly live up to the reputation," Darren muttered. "Ser Brynden will have his work cut out for him." "Juan will help with that," Ned said, turning his gaze back to the Crownlanders. The gold cloaks on the walls tried to return fire with little success. "Right now, we just have to focus on breaking through here." Madden, Darren, and Jon waited patiently as the forces exchanged fire. To their left, the forces of the Vale marched forward at a slow pace, taking their time while approaching the enemy, most of whom were on horseback. The Dothraki among them were getting more and more anxious, and looked ready to charge at any moment. Just as Darren knew that would any time now, Darren said, noticing where Ned was looking. All Royce has to do is provoke them. That should do it, Jon said grimly as crossbowmen came forward, loading bolts. As soon as the first volley was on its way, Ned knew who would be hit first. It wasn't the heavily armored sellswords, but the Dothraki horse lords. The bolts cut down men and horses at an alarming rate, and it was just the push they needed to make the nomadic horsemen charge. Even as their allies shouted at them to stop, the horse lords formed loose ranks and charged, yelling their war cries as they brandished their arcs, whips, and bows above their heads. The Valeman archers hurriedly ran back to the safety of their lines, as ranks of pikemen ran forward, setting their spears as the horsemen approached. Ned knew exactly what would happen next. The Dothraki slammed into the pikes, dozens of their horses being skewered on impact. Many of the Valemen went down as well, but now the Dothraki riders were stuck deep in the pikemen, cutting down men with reckless abandon. The Knights of the Vale swung around the Dothraki riders, cutting them off from their allies at the walls. Fighting men with pikes was hard enough for the Dothraki. They were lightly armored, and their weapons were only meant to attack, no defend, against fully equipped knights wearing steel plate and chainmail, wielding weapons that cut through leather like a knife through parchment. They were cut down without remorse. They were caught between pikes and knights, and although they fought fiercely, they died all the same. That's one down, Darren said. Now a couple thousand sellswords to go. Line break. Conington! The hand grimaced as he watched the front line waver before the men behind pushed them forward, and the line held. The men of the Reach were holding no punches, as they threw themselves against the men of the Golden Company. On either flank, a wedge of mounted knights flew in, trying their best to break Conington's men, but to no avail. The men of the Golden Company lived up to their reputation, making the forces of Randyll Tarly work for every bloody inch. Conington had lost contact with the Dornish host long ago, when the Reacher host forcefully split the allies, pinning Prince Oberyn's men against the Blackwater Rush and Conington against the walls of the city. Constant volleys of arrows rained down on the sellswords, but the ranks of spearmen merely lifted their shields and kept fighting. Black Balak, commander of the company's own archers, tried his best to return fire, but for every man he had, Tarly had a dozen. Eventually they would run out of arrows and have to pick up a sword and shield like everyone else. The Hand knew that there was a host of Stormlords as well on his side, but Tarly had deployed them against the Dornish, and rightfully so. If there were men who knew how to fight the Dornish, it was the Marcher Lords. Conington would have loved to go against his former peers, but that was a fight for the Dornish to have. Hold, Conington bellowed, keeping a firm handle on the reins as his mount struggled for footing on the churning mud. Hold!
Viserion's roar sounded over the battle as Aegon swooped in, the white and gold dragon burning fiery trenches in Tarly's host. Unfortunately, the dragon could only attack from a certain range, and that meant that it was well within range to be fired back at. Dozens of spears, arrows, and bolts flew skyward, assaulting the beast. It cried out in frustration and pain before leaving, its body dripping blood. Conington felt like screaming himself. When they had planned the battle, the dragons were meant to be the tipping point. But they hadn't expected Terry or his host of Reachmen recently returned from the Westerlands. It made things far more difficult, as the man had his men ready to brave dragonfire. Conington wasn't sure how the hell Terry had accomplished that, but Viserion's recent attack had been extinguished by a group carrying water sacks. Water Brigade. That had been Stark's answer to the dragons. Those a lot of fucking archers. What was worse was that it was working. My lord, Mandrake is asking for help. Conington's squire called over the din of battle. The former lord of Griffin's Roost glared at the lad. Denied, he barked. Mandrake will have to hold. Conington had split up the company into smaller hosts under the command of high-ranking captains. Mark Mandrake, Goras Edrian, Franklin Flowers, himself, and Harry Strickland. Strickland was at the Iron Gate with his small host of men, while all the others protected the Lion and King's Gates. The Hand had hoped that the smaller units would be able to be maneuvered easier. That way the enemy could be trapped between two hosts and hammered like a piece of hot metal between a hammer and anvil. Instead, Tarly had split up the units, pouring his cavalry into the gaps between them, while infantry and archers kept them in place. Now, instead of one combined front, Tarly had used Conington's plan against him and was destroying the four small hosts.
The Hand would be impressed if he wasn't fuming over his humiliation and trying to keep his men from being utterly and completely destroyed. "Send word to Mormont again," Conington roared to his squire. "We need help." "Sejara has already said that he has no one to send," the boy answered. "His men are stretched between 4 gates on the eastern flank." Conington cursed under his breath and returned his attention back to the battle. He and his men would have already been smashed and routed if not for Aegon. Even though his dragon was wounded, it was still a dragon, and Tarly's men kept a watchful eye on the skies, not resting until they saw the dragon dead. And if the dragon kept receiving punishment, it wouldn't be too long before it was. "Hold," Conington bellowed again, directing more men into a point in the wall that had weakened. "Hold." A thought occurred to Conington as he surveyed the field. As far as the eye could see, it was a sea of green. He could see the small islands of company warriors, but they were being buffeted by waves and waves of reachmen. Out in the open, they were lambs to the slaughter. But if they could get back into the city, then they might stand a chance. "Jasper," Conington called, looking to his squire. "Get word to the others. They are to retreat into the city." The boy grimaced, but nodded and rode off. Conington wasn't sure if a messenger could even make it to the others, but he hoped that it would once they were in the city. Then they could take away Tarly's numerical advantage. Then hopefully they can inflict enough damage to force the bastards to retreat. It would take a bloody miracle to win this fight. "We're moving towards the King's Gate," Conington ordered, turning to his captains. "Keep the shield wall up and tell Belloc that we're moving." Line break. Robb. The Northern King watched as the battle raged before him. Tarly's host had the men of the Golden Company completely surrounded, and were hitting them relentlessly. Robb was amazed that they had lasted that long. Lord Curran's messenger had said that the Dornish were throwing them back, but they were still waiting for Seaworth to arrive before giving their all. The former smuggler had come in handy when Robb had planned his attack. 5,000 Valumen had marched off in the middle of the night under Septa Septon Templeton, the Knight of the Nine Stars. Secta Davos had orders from Robb to land them in the Blackwater Rush to flank the Dornish. If Caron did his job correctly and pushed the Dornish back against the walls instead of towards the gate, then the Dornish commander would have no choice but to pull his host in and cut the Stormlanders off. When Septa Septon and his Valumen arrived, they should find themselves facing the backs of the Dornish. Bryce Caron has shown himself to be a reliable man so far in the war. Robb had faith that he would not fail him now. To the east, the hosts under his father and Lord Royce were doing just fine. Garen's plan to lure the Dothraki out and trap them had worked perfectly, and now over 1,000 horsemen lay dead. Royce's men had taken a hit because of it, but a few hundred men for over 1,000 Dothraki was a price the Lord of Runstone was willing to pay. The one group that continued to surprise and amaze Robb were the Unsullied. The Blackfish had kept up his attack with the catapults and the volleys, but even after they were hit with boulders and arrows, they reformed their ranks. It was like nothing Robb had ever seen before. Any other group would have broken, but the Unsullied never did. They continued to raise their shields even as their comrades fell around them. "They're a hardy group," Lord Forrester grunted. "I had heard stories, of course, but—" "Sir Brynden will enjoy the challenge," Robb said. "But we still have the company as well. When the time is right, they'll strike." "What time is that?" Robb glanced at the Lord of Ironwrath. "When we run out of boulders." The Northman chuckled as he looked up at the sky. "I'm surprised the Targaryen girl hasn't done anything yet." The large black dragon had soared towards Sir Brendan's men, but after her dragon received a face full of arrows, she didn't seem inclined to try another frontal assault. Instead, she attempted to destroy the arrows and boulders, and they flew towards her men. She had little success. The way Daenerys rode Drogon, she didn't want to put him in harm's way. She was waiting to choose her moment to attack, instead of diving in without any care for her mount. Her nephew has yet to learn that lesson. From the reports coming from Tarly's host, Viserion was close to death. His hide was studded with arrows and spears. Something that had confused Robb was when Daenerys tried to ride east to save her Dothraki warriors. Drogon had followed her command without hesitation, but Rhaegal had roared in what seemed like defiance and flew back towards the Godswood, forcing Daenerys to go after him. That little moment of confusion had been all Royce needed to cut down the Dothraki riders before they could be saved by Daenerys and her dragons. "Your Grace," a rider said, approaching Robb. Sarah Brendan wishes to let you know that he is sending his men in. Robb nodded. Send word to my father. Make sure the Company of the Rose is ready. The man nodded and rode off. Lord Forrester waited till the man was gone before speaking. My lord, the Unsullied have weathered boulders and arrows. Hundreds, if not more than 1,000, of their friends have died. Will a cavalry charge really break them? Their power comes from their ranks, Robb answered, remembering the information his cousin and uncle had given him. The rivermen will keep them in place as the cavalry breaks their formation. Once they can no longer be supported by others, they are just men in quilted tunics, with spears and shields. They aren't suited for single combat, at least not their rank-and-file warriors. They won't break, Forrester commented. I know, Robb said. They'll fight to the death, but at least they won't be able to fight effectively. The two Northmen watched as the battle continued. Robb's battle guard was spread out. The Northerners who had traveled with Jon stayed with him with his father. He hoped that they would win glory in the battle, because they wouldn't if they guarded him. He had mostly recovered from the effects of poison, but he was still weak. His Northmen weren't the only ones away from Robb. Loras was off with Lord Caron fighting the Dornish. He had a bone to pick with them since it had been the Dornish that injured him at Harrenhal. All Robb had around him was Ser Roland, Ser Balin, Ser Garth, Ser Hobber, Ser Robar, and as always, Brienne. 6 elite warriors and 1,000 ferocious Northerner warriors was more than enough to keep the king safe. Greywind was just an added bonus. Your Grace, Lord Stark and Lord Royce, are preparing to attack the walls, a messenger said, riding up to Robb. It seems they heard that Sebrindon was moving in, Lord Forrester commented. Let me guess, he said, with a grim smile. All according to plan. Robb returned the smile. So it would seem, he turned to the messenger. Make sure Dwan Umber is ready to strike. Line break. Eddard. The Lord of Winterfell carved through the men of the Crownlands and the Gold Cloaks. Even though the enemy had more men, the company of sellswords had formed a wedge and was currently smashing their way through. The few hundred cavalry that Ned had left were smashing into the flanks of the enemy, pulling back out before charging back in. The tactic of hammer blows combined with the flying wedge had the enemy on the back foot. Don Umber and 500 cavalry had ridden off to help the Blackfish deal with the Unsullied, leaving Ned with only half of the cavalry that company had at its disposal. Even still, they were doing a number on the enemy. Ned parried the spear point before shoving his sword through the man's face. As the man joined the rest of the dead on the ground, Ned took a moment to survey the battle in front of the gate. Gold Cloak archers fired down Ned's host, but they were slowly being thinned out themselves because of the company's archers. Jon and Darren were on opposite sides of Ned, making sure the wedge kept its shape. Jon was fighting an older-looking man, and looked to have the better of the exchange. The man wore a blue tabard with 2 crossed blacksmith hammers. Ned didn't immediately recognize the device. Ned's gaze fell on the white-armored warrior, who was the obvious commander. He was directing more men against the wedge. It had been a while since he had seen Sir Barristan, but the old knight hadn't seemed to age too much. He still looked as strong and as fit as ever. The line in front of him looked to be breaking soon. The men were bent back, and all it would take was one good charge. Ned looked down and was surprised to find Ghost by his side. Or perhaps a single horseman and a horse-sized direwolf. Ned spurred his mount forward, charging into the line and scattering a few men as his sword flashed down, cutting down 2 men in a matter of seconds. He pushed forward, killing men left and right. Ghost the telling factor, tackling full men and ripping off arms and mauling faces. The sellswords behind the pair filled in the wake they left, fighting with renewed fury. Just as Ned hoped, the line of men defending the gate broke and ran back into the city. The men on the flanks, who had been dealing with constant charges of cavalry, saw their friends break, and soon were routed as well, knowing full well that they could get caught outside and killed. The cavalry, seeing this, simply spurred their horses after the fleeing men. Ned had cantered up to the knight who stood like a statue in the middle of the gate, surrounded by 6 warriors. It was the most ragtag band Ned had ever seen, and Sir Barristan was the odd one out of the mostly Esso group. Ned dismounted and handed his horse off as he strode forward, sheathing his longsword and drawing ice. He did not have the same feeling as he did when he fought Arthur Dane. At the tower, he had been feeling but boiling anger for Rhaegar and the Kingsguard, who had helped hide his sister. Now, he felt nothing but sadness as he faced a man he considered a friend. Lord Stark, Sarah Barristan said with a nod. Sarah Barristan, Ned replied. Put down your weapon. You will be treated fairly. You have my word. I believe that I would, but I cannot put down my sword, Sarah Barristan said. My queen ordered me to hold the gate. Ned glanced past the knight and saw the enemy begin to come back. In a few moments, they would follow the knight's example and form a defensive line under the gate. Then it would be much harder to break them. Jon and Darren appeared at his side. Have the archers fire at the men behind Selmy, Ned muttered quietly, glancing at his cousin. Jon on me. His son nodded and readied his sword, moving forward with Ned. Sarah Barristan nodded sadly and removed his helm, tossing it off to the side. Lord Stark is mine, he ordered. Tempko. A younger man in leather armor nodded firmly. The four combatants clashed just under the heavy iron gate. Jon squared off against the Asasi boy, the two fighters exchanging a flurry of blows. Ned could only glance at the fight as he and Sarah Barristan moved slowly in a half circle. Ned was well aware that he wouldn't have Howland Reed to save him. He had to fight Sarah Barristan on his own. I'm sorry, Ned said. As am I, Sarah Barristan agreed before the two men launched themselves at each other. As always, Barristan was amazingly fast. His strikes were perfectly timed and he was always balanced. It took every bit of concentration Ned had to meet the man blow for blow. As he fought, he couldn't stop flashbacks of the fight in the sands in the shadow of the tower, the pale blades slashing at him. Arthur Dayne was the most dangerous man Ned had ever fought. The Secton Bursten, Selmy made Ned almost doubt that belief. A grunt of pain stopped the fight, as both warriors looked over at where Jon was pulling his blade from the other man's gut. Ned's son looked a little worse for wear, but he pointed his sword at the enemy and charged forward. A volley of arrows flying over his head as the cavalry charged forward towards the thin line of defenders. Sarah Barristan looked torn for just a second, looking as if he wanted to rally his men, but then he saw his men break and flee again under the arrows and the charge. His shoulders slumped as he turned back to his duel with Ned. The fight is over, Septon, Ned said. There is no shame in defeat, you know that. Sarah Barristan's shoulders squared again, as his sword came up. You have not taken the gate, my lord, not while I still stand. Ned nodded. Very well. Their swords met in a screech of steel. Line break. Daenerys hoped that an aerial view would give her a better look at the battle. Unfortunately, it did exactly that. Everywhere she looked, her men looked outmatched and outnumbered. The Golden Company was stuck in a sea of reachmen. The Dornish were fighting a battle on two fronts as another host appeared behind them on boats. It seems Robb intended to use every asset to his advantage. Her faithful Unsullied had been assaulted by arrows and boulders, and now were facing Riverlanders in front of them, as their formation was broken by a well-timed cavalry charge that had come from the east. She knew that they would continue to fight to the death. The eunuch soldiers had no fear, but most of them were injured if not already dead. They wouldn't last long if the battle continued as it was. The Mother of Dragons resisted the urge to look eastward. She had already tried to fly that way twice, but Rhaegal seemed adamant to defy her. So instead of losing her child when she needed him the most, she roamed over the northern wall, waiting for her time to strike. She had already received her fair share of arrow volleys, and although she loved her dragons and knew that they were fearsome, they were still small and she could not bear to have them killed. Unlike her nephew, Aegon was having very little success in the west. She had caught glimpses of Visarion's body, and the sight had torn at her heart. Her child's beautiful white and gold scales had turned scarlet and gold with blood. Dozens of arrows were embedded in his underbelly, and his wings were torn and shredded. She had even spotted a spear stuck in one of his hind legs. It angered her that her nephew had so little regard for the dragon's safety, but she also understood that, without him, the Golden Company was lost. Ser Jorah was unable to give them any reinforcements, and the Reacher commander had used Conington's plan against him. From the looks of it, the individual hosts seemed to be trying to move towards the gates, but that only allowed the Reacher forces to divide them even more. Daenerys believed she knew what the Hand was trying to do, but his men were already too far gone for it to work. She wished desperately to do anything for them, but there was nothing she could do. Not without her dragons taking the punishment. They were too small, she knew that, but she was just now realizing just how small they were. They couldn't attack without being open to a counterattack, and Daenerys didn't want to know what it felt like to be hit by dozens of arrows. Daenerys steeled her nerves and flew eastward, towards the red and white covered dragon, hovering barely over the king's gate. Aegon nodded to her as she approached. Daenerys pointed towards the walls, and thankfully, the other rider got the message. The 3 dragons landed heavily on the walls as the defenders scrambled out of the way. Aegon slid off by Septon. He moaned in pain, and seemed to hide himself under his destroyed wings. Daenerys shoved whatever anger she had back down as she strode over to her nephew. "We're losing," she said bluntly. Aegon's eyes narrowed. "I noticed. At least I'm doing something about it." Daenerys let the insult slide. "There's only one way this can end." Aegon immediately looked north, towards the direwolf banner. "Stark," he said, "if charge him with all 3 dragons, he will have nowhere to run." "I'll draw his archers," Daenerys said. "You and Viserion just need to reach him." Aegon nodded. "Right." The 2 dragon riders swiftly remounted and directed the dragons skyward. It took more time for Aegon, since he had to coax Viserion out of his shell of pain and misery. But eventually, the white and gold dragon joined his clutchmates in the air. Daenerys nodded to her nephew and they set off north, towards Robb Stark. As soon as they were close enough, Daenerys urged Drogon into a dive towards the men of the Riverlands. Rhaegal following his example. When they were close enough, Daenerys screamed at the top of her lungs. "Daenerys." Both dragons unleashed torrents of fire as they passed, leaving 2 burning trails behind. As they flew, Daenerys felt something whiz past her. Hundreds of arrows erupted from the enemy, easily finding marks on the dragons. Daenerys pulled Drogon back up, glancing at where Viserion and Aegon were. When she saw that they had yet to reach Robb, she gritted her teeth and turned back towards the enemy. She just had to get one more pass, and Aegon would make it. One more pass. Line break. Robb couldn't stop the fear from seeping into his stomach, as the gold and white dragon flew right at him. The black-armored rider was unmistakable. The archers would normally fire at Aegon since he was coming at the king, but they had been ordered to keep their focus on Daenerys and her 2 dragons. The Northern King was not without his own archers. Lord Gregor and Robb's guards rallied the Northmen and led them away, leaving Robb and Grey Wind standing alone on the hill. Robb watched as Viserion opened his maw and could literally see fire build in his throat. When the beast was about to unleash on Robb, it snapped its head to the side as arrows peppered its head and face. It closed its mouth and banked away from where the arrows were coming from. And that's exactly what Robb wanted it to do. The dragon suddenly let out a heart-stopping cry of pain as it went down in a flailing ball of wings, tail and rider. Robb only had a moment to see the arrow stuck deep in its eye, pushed in deeper by the crash landing. Willas and Tyrion had found little weakness for dragons, but one was its eyes. Of course, hitting a flying fire-breathing beast was no easy feat. That's why Robb had hidden the best archers he had in hidden trenches on either side of his position. On his left were men of Riventree Hall, archers who carried weirwood longbows and who could put 3 arrows in the air in a matter of seconds. On his right was Ian Hawker, by far the best archer Robb had ever seen. The Northern King knew that, should the battle go like he thought it would, the Targaryens would seek to cut the head off the snake. They would go after him. That's why he had set the trap with his archers, and they had not failed him. Robb and Grey Wind rode towards the still form of the dragon as Lord Forrester and the Northerners surrounded the body, armed with bows and pikes. Robb's guards also returned to him. Even though Robb had a lot of faith in his trap, he didn't want anyone else to die should it go wrong. Adine crawled out from under the dragon. His helm had fallen off, and his silver-blonde hair was plastered to his head. Part of his hair had turned red from a cut he had suffered. His left arm was turned at an odd angle and probably broken by the way he was holding it. All the man had left was a set of battered black armor and his sword. Robb dismounted, keeping a hand on his sword. "Yield," he ordered. "The battle is over. Yield and your men will be treated well. You have my word." Aegon staggered to his feet, glaring hatefully at the bearded Northerners. They all glared hatefully back. Many of them had probably fought in Robert's rebellion 20 years prior. "I'm no one's war trophy," Aegon spat. Robb shrugged off his cloak, letting it pool at his feet as he drew his sword. He was only armored in a steel gorget, much like how Jon usually was, but he still had his plated leather and claw. Once again, Robb thanked the gods that he had a Valyrian steel sword. If he had been wielding a Fu steel sword, he wasn't sure how long his sword arm would be able to hold it. "Your Grace," Brienne cried, riding forward. For her service, Robb had given the warrior woman Red Rain to wield. Of course, he had done it in private so as not to insult Sir Jon, but there were few who deserved it more than Brienne. "It's all right, Brienne," Robb said, holding up his good arm to stop her as he gazed at Aegon. "This is my fight." "To the death," Aegon snarled, marching towards Robb. "To the death," Robb agreed. The two men met in a furious clash of blades. Aegon knew that Robb was recovering from an attack, and so tried to hammer his sword against Robb's, but the Northern King was not a fool. Robb moved constantly to his right, where Aegon's bad arm was, parrying his opponent's blows and replying with his own. Each man was hampered, but that did little to dull their fighting spirit. Bad blood had been building between them ever since they had met each other, not far from where they fought. They were letting it all out now. Robb caught himself in a bad situation when the two men locked blades. Aegon immediately began pressing down on Robb, but Robb sent a flat-footed kick to the other man's knee, staggering him as Robb stepped back, a plan quickly coming to his mind. The king in the north charged forward, Aegon meeting him as they again locked swords. Robb immediately grabbed onto Aegon's sword arm, the only good arm he had left. He knew that what he was about to do was very risky, and he only had a moment to do it. Robb held Aegon's hand in place as he slid his sword out of the lock and thrusted towards Aegon's heart. The black steel breastplate holding for just a moment against the Valyrian steel before giving away. Aegon's eyes went wide as his legs gave out. Robb ripped his sword from his hand as he fell, tossing it to the side. He watched as Aegon gently touched the blood pouring out of his chest. He looked up at Robb for just a second before his eyes shuttered close, and he fell over, dead. Robb nodded respectfully to Aegon's body. Even wounded and his army all but defeated, he still fought valiantly instead of giving up. It was annoyingly admirable. Aegon had turned out to be many things, but Robb could never say that the man wasn't brave. "Make sure his body is treated with respect," Robb ordered as he moved towards the downed dragon. Anhawker stood by its head, an arrow laid on his string. Robb glanced at the beast's chest. It was breathing, though only barely, and was in an obvious amount of pain. "Finish it," Robb ordered. Aegon nodded and sent an arrow into the beast's other eye. It did not roar in pain or flail. All it did was shudder and go limp as the rest of its life left the body. Line break. Conington? The hand of the dead king fought on foot as his men died around him. His plan to get inside the gate failed miserably as pressure continued to mount on his eastern flank. That combined with the fact that the Reachman archers didn't have to worry about a dragon and could just pour volley after volley into the weary sellswords, finally broke the shield wall, and death and destruction took over the most feared sellsword company in Essos. He came face to face with another knight. The Reacher force seemed to have hundreds of them. He wielded two swords and fought like a demon. His tabard was soaked with blood, but Conington could just barely make out a golden rose. Conington watched him cut down one of his captains before turning to him. "Conington," he grunted, his voice muffled under his helm. "Yield." Conington stabbed his sword into the ground and ripped off his helm. He sucked in a large lungful of air before retrieving his sword and bringing up his shield. "Fuck you," he spat, charging forward. The other man seemed to shrug before meeting Conington. The two men fought there in the midst of muck and death. Conington had fought many battles in Essos as a member of the Golden Company, and although he had experience, he was having trouble keeping up with the other man. His swords were like a blur of silver and could defend against his attacks while also hammering his own against Conington's shield, which was slowly folding in on itself. Conington tried a move he picked up, feinting twice before thrusting towards his opponent's defenseless chest. But the man quickly recovered and twisted Conington's sword from his hand by forcing the tip and pressing the base of the blade down. The move was done with almost effortless ease and left Conington defenseless save for a battered and broken shield. He felt air swish by his neck as the other man's sword passed by. He then felt liquid pour down his chest and into his armor. Then the ground flew up to meet him, and the world went black. Line break. Garland. The man known as Garland the Gallant glared through his helm at the hand's still body. The man was a good fighter, but Garland had unleashed everything he had against the man. Although it had yet to be proven, Garland personally thought that Conington was the one who had tried to have Robb and Torrhen killed. It all made sense to him. Conington controlled the Golden Company, where Heir served. Daenerys had been too welcoming, and Aegon wouldn't dare order the death of a child, not after his own past. The next logical person was Jon Conington. Loras had fought under Caron to get his revenge against the Dornish. Garland had fought under Tarley to get his own. "That's for my family," he grunted before moving on to another opponent. The Golden Company was nearly finished off. Line break. Daenerys. Daenerys could only watch as her child and nephew were killed. Stark's plan to get Viserion on the ground had worked to perfection, much to Daenerys' fury and sadness. She then watched as Aegon emerged from the dragon and fought Robb, only to soon fall as well. It seems the Starks had a knack for killing dragons. The battle was over, that much was clear. The Golden Company was nothing but a few small pockets of resistance. The Reacher forces were now turning on the Dornish hosts, smashing them against the walls of the city and the banks of the Blackwater Rush. They were her only force still showing some resistance. The sellswords to the east were either routed or had surrendered to the forces of the Vale. Sauer Barristan's force had broken as well and was being chased through the streets. Even her Unsullied had been destroyed, though not broken. Their formation had been destroyed, and although they were not famed as great individual soldiers, they still refused to surrender or flee. Her army was gone. What she wanted more than anything was to burn her enemies, but in doing so she knew she'd lose her last two dragons. She had already lost one and her only family left. She couldn't afford to lose anymore. Daenerys landed on the Gate of the Gods, where Ser Jorah was directing archers against the men of the Riverlands. He looked grimly at the queen as she slid off the black dragon. "Khaleesi," he said, "I'm glad to see you still alive. King Aegon." "He's dead, I know," Daenerys said. "Pull back everyone to the Red Keep." The Northern Knight shook his head. "We can pull the Unsullied back, and perhaps Ser Barristan's men from the Old Gate, but that is all. Every other gate is being assaulted by the enemy, if not taken already." "Is there nothing else we can do?" Daenerys asked, fighting back the feeling of desperation. "Surrender, Khaleesi," Ser Jorah advised. "This battle is lost, but you can still save their lives." "And give up my throne?" Daenerys said quietly. Ser Jorah gazed down at the battle for a second, before looking back at Daenerys. "Live to fight another day, my lady." "Ser Jorah is correct," a voice said from behind them. The pair turned to find Varys, who looked out of place in his robe and slippers amongst men in armor with swords and spears. Daenerys saw Ser Jorah's hand fall to his sword. There was no lost love between the spymaster and the former spy. "Varys," she greeted. "My lady," Varys said with a small bow, "I am sorry that it has taken me this long, but I have confirmed the identity of the one who hired Lisan Omar." "Who?" Daenerys asked. "It was Conington," Varys said sadly. "The reason it took me so long to confirm that fact was because Lysano killed my little bird. I found their body and the message that was meant for me. I thought your little bird sang in your ear." Ser Jorah grunted. "Better safe than sorry," Varys said with a shrug. Daenerys glanced over her shoulder, where the last of the Golden Company was being wiped out. Ser Jorah's words rang in her ears. Live to fight another day. If Varys was right and Daenerys surrendered to Robb, there was a good chance he wouldn't kill her. Not if she could convince him that he got his revenge. "Tell the army to stand down," she ordered quietly. "Tell the young wolf that I will be in the Red Keep." Ser Jorah nodded. "Yes, Khaleesi." Line break. Eddard. Ned shoved Ser Barristan back, parrying his attack. Both their chests were heaving from the fight. Neither had managed to get even a mortal blow on the other, but it was almost as if they weren't trying. Something was keeping them from killing each other, although neither realized it. As Ned went to charge, horns went up from inside the city, stopping him in his tracks. Both he and Ser Barristan lowered their swords, as a responding horn came from Robb's army. For Ned it was the signal to stand down. "Stand down," Ned muttered. Ser Barristan said. "It seems the fighting has stopped." Ned placed Ice Tip down in the dirt and leaned on it. He was not an old man, but he certainly felt like one. He's lived a life that Brandon or Lyanna would love to have. Battles, mysterious family members, dragons. It was all too much for a simple norther like Ned. All he wanted was to be home with his family, away from the madness in the south. "Lord Stark," a rider called, pulling his horse to a stiff-legged stop. "The king wishes for you to join him at the Red Keep." Ned nodded. "Find me and Sarah Barristan mounts." The rider nodded and rode off. "Thank you, Lord Stark," Sarah Barristan said, wiping his blade clean. "Might as well find out what happened together," Ned said. The two men waited patiently as horses were brought forth for both of them. Soon they were in the saddle and riding towards the Red Keep. As they rode, they saw men loyal to Robb disarming the Targaryen soldiers. Even though Robb had ordered the army to stand down, it was clear that the fight hadn't ended in a draw. Robb's army had won. The order to stand down was just a way to stop any further death. "I may not have time later, so I will ask this now." Ned started. "How did you end up with the Targaryen girl?" "When Robert died, Joffrey and Cersei blamed his death on me," Sarah Barristan answered, "though I'm sure it was also a ploy to promote the Kingslayer to Lord Commander." "Can't say that did anything," Ned grunted. "He spent the war in the cells below River Run." Sarah Barristan nodded. "So you fled to Essos," Ned said. "I saw no other choice," Sarah Barristan said. "Joffrey sent men after me. Daenerys seemed like the most I wanted to." "I understand," Ned said. "I don't know what my son will do, but I know that he is not Robert Baratheon." "You did a fine job with him, my lord," Sarah Barristan praised. Ned shook his head as they rode into the castle courtyard. "I helped make him the man he is. He became the king all on his own." "Father." Sarah Barristan, Robb said, striding up to the pair. He was followed by Ser Brynden along with his guard. "Robb," Ned said. "Ser Jorah," said Daenerys is inside, Robb said. "Ser Jorah?" Ned said. "Lord Stark," Jorah Mormont said stiffly, being escorted forward. He, like everyone else, had been disarmed, and now his hands were being held behind his back by a pair of northern soldiers. "It's been a long time." "Ser Jorah," Ned growled. "You still must pay for your crimes."
"I paid, Stark."
Ser Jorah barked. "I left my home, my family, my sword, my honor. I left it all behind. I have paid." Ned growled but dropped the subject. "Daenerys has surrendered." Ser Jorah nodded. "She has. She is waiting in the throne room for Lord Robb." "Let's not keep her waiting," Robb said, looking and acting very much like a king. "Sarah Brynden, please make sure that everything is handled. I want no more killing and no looting or raping. Have the enemy rounded up on the tourney ground in individual groups, and start counting bodies, if you can." "Yes, your grace," Ser Brynden said. "Lord Robb," Sarah Barristan called after them. "Yes?" Robb said, stopping and looking over his shoulder. "Do not go into the Godswood," the old knight explained. Ned didn't know what that meant, but Robb seemed to. "Sarah Balon," he said. "Take a dozen men and seal off the Godswood." The Stormlander knight nodded and strode off. "Father," Robb said, striding into the castle. Line break. "Robb." Daenerys' attempt to look regal worked to some extent. She was garbed in light silver mail and bleached white leather armor. She had a steel dragon covering her shoulders, with its wings acting as shoulder pauldrons, and its head and tail forming a sort of gorget. The silver and white combined with her pale skin and silver blonde hair made her look like a spirit from another world. She carried no weapons from what Robb could tell. "Robb," she said as he entered. "Daenerys," Robb responded. "You've surrendered." The Targaryen girl nodded slowly. "I have. You have ordered your men to stand down as well, have you not?" "More or less," Robb answered honestly. "Your men are being disarmed and rounded up, but they won't be killed. You have my word on that." "I know who tried to have you killed," Daenerys said, getting right to the point. "That's why you surrendered," Robb muttered. "Very well. Who?" Daenerys seemed to swallow her words. "Lord Varys has confirmed Conington's role in the assassination plot." Robb raised an eyebrow. "A little too late for him to pay for his crimes. My good brother Garland killed him in combat. What about Aegon?" Daenerys shook her head. "He played no part in it. Believe what you will about him, but he is not one to condone the killing of children." Robb shrugged. "Any other accomplices?" "No, my lord," Varys said from the side of the room. "Lord Conington and Mar worked alone." Daenerys gazed at Robb. What will you do now, young wolf? Robb felt like the girl was challenging him, seeing if he could make the hard decision. He didn't take the bait. He knew that he didn't have to fake strength or make some stupid decision to look better in front of his men. He was secure in who he was as a man and as a king. If Daenerys was goading him to make a mistake, she was about to be sorely disappointed. You and your advisors will be contained to the maiden vault, Robb said. Then I will figure out what will be done with you. For a man who seemed to be able to predict the moves of my commanders, I'm surprised you haven't already had my neck put on the executioner's block. Daenerys said evenly. Conington tried to kill me and my son, not you. Robb grunted. You were the fool who fought to protect a would-be child killer. Daenerys' hands gripped the iron pommels on the throne. She again swallowed her words. What's done is done. What's done is done. Robb agreed. This battle is over. Robb sexits. The king sat alone in his room, looking at the single piece of parchment that contained the long list of names of those who had died during the battle. The battle had been considered a decisive victory by Robb's commanders and his men. They had killed the enemy king and his top general, destroyed their most potent force in the Unsullied, and slew a dragon on top of it all. But the cost had been very high, at least in Robb's eyes. Daniunas Bracken, Sarah Lynn Corbray, Horton Redford, Duan Umber, Sarah John Fossaway, and Eddard Stark. They were just a few of the lords and knights who had been lost in the battle, fighting valiantly against the Targaryen forces. Robb knew that none of the dead would begrudge him for what he did. He and his son had been attacked, and the Targaryens had refused to hand over the guilty party. It had been obvious who had ordered the assassination, but Daenerys had accepted the inevitable battle as soon as she refused to hand over Conington. Conington's head had been cut off and placed on a spike outside the castle gates, something Garland had taken pleasure in doing. He was a kind and genial man most of the time, but the attack on Robb and Torrhen had brought out a vengeful side that Robb had never seen before. Garland's passion for revenge, however, only served to show his devotion to his family. Garland hadn't been the only one who had found revenge in the battle. Apparently, a knight by the name of Gerald Dane had been the one who had grievously injured Loras at the Battle of Harrenhal. The Knight of Flowers had sought out Darkstar during the battle, and had cut him down after a fierce battle that had left Loras bruised and battered. Dane's death had helped secure a victory over the Dornish, as he was one of their best warriors. The door opened to reveal Margaery, who strode into the room with Mira right behind her. Robb was immediately on his feet, reaching her just as the door closed. Relief flooded Margaery's face as soon as she laid eyes on Robb. I heard that you had battled a Dagon, Margaery said quietly as Robb hugged her. I told me you wouldn't fight. I didn't plan on it, Robb said, kissing Margaery. It just happened. Margaery patted Robb's chest. Your northern honor is going to get you into a lot of trouble one day. Robb smiled slightly. Although his thoughts were dark and gloomy, he couldn't help but smile whenever Margaery was with him. It led me to you, so I guess it already has. He joked, earning himself a light punch on his good arm. He nodded kindly to Mira. Mira, even with a baby in her arms, the daughter of Gregor Forrester, still managed to curtsy. My lord, she replied, I'm glad to see that you've survived. Thank you, Robb said, taking Torrhen from her. I'm sure you want to find your father and brothers. You should be with them. Lord Gregor had stayed with Robb after the collective army had split up at River Ren. Radric had gone north with Jon to help reclaim the north from the Boltons and the Ironborn. Asher Forrester, Lord Gregor's second son, who had been exiled to prevent a war between House Forrester and House Whitehill, had returned with the Company of the Rose. Asher, Radric, Mira, and Gregor had all been reunited in Robb's camp when Robb's own family had returned to him. The rest of the Forresters, Ethan, Ryan, and Talia, were all still at Ironrath. Mira glanced at Margaery, who nodded in agreement. The lady-in-waiting quickly bowed before leaving. With Torrhen cradled in one arm, Robb and Margaery moved over to the table, where the queen immediately looked at what Robb had been staring at. Just as with Robb, Margaery's shoulders had slumped a little, as she read all who had been lost. Thankfully, the manner of their death hadn't been reported. Only Robb had that unfortunate knowledge. How many? She asked quietly. 30,000. Robb sighed. It's not terrible. The Targaryens lost over 50,000, and more are dying every day because of injuries. And I heard a rumor about a dragon. Margaery pressed gently. King Agod rode Viserion, the gold and white dragon, into battle, Robb explained. Lord Tarly put so many arrows and spears in the beast that it was a bloody wreck by the time Aegon decided to come after me. And the plan worked, Marguerite assumed. Perfectly, Robb answered. Ian was the one who brought the creature down, and he was the one who finished it off. He has dozens of nicknames to choose from now. I can imagine, Marguerite agreed. Where's the body? I had it dragged to the dragon pit. The other two are contained to the Godswood. Daenerys was in control of Drogon and Rhaegal. She was surprisingly conservative with them. Robb said with a shrug, we have a busy day today. Marguerite raised an eyebrow. Oh? We have a lot that needs to be sorted before we hold court tomorrow, Robb said. Are you ready to rule? Line break. My lords, my lady. Robb said, standing up as the Dornish party entered. The Red Viper looked extremely weary, but he had a dangerous glint in his eye. His brother Doran was stone-faced, as his massive guardsman pushed him in his wheelchair. The girl, Arianne if Robb remembered correctly, was the only one who looked at ease with the situation. Can I offer you some refreshments? Robb ordered. Wine? I asked for a Dornish red. Apparently Cersei had barrels of it. Prince Doran shook his head. That is kind of you, Lord Robb, but I nor my family is in the mood for wine. Rather, we would prefer to learn why you have summoned us. Robb glanced at Marguerite before nodding and taking his seat, motioning for the others to do the same. Robb clasped his hands in front of him and gazed firmly at the old Dornish prince, knowing full well that he was Robb's best chance. I must first offer my condolences for what occurred, Robb began. I do not regret the action I took, but I am sorry that you and your men were harmed in the conflict. That won't bring them back. Prince Oberyn grumbled. I know, Robb said, but I wanted to put that forward first. Thank you, Doran said briefly. Now please, why have you called us? I have no wish to make Dorne my enemy, Robb said bluntly. I have already made arrangements for you and your men to be sailed back to Dorne. No guards, no hostages taken, nothing. Nothing, Prince Doran said, raising an eyebrow curiously. You are letting part of the army you fought against return home without any prisoners? I am, Robb replied. As I said, I am sorry for your losses. Conington's foul plot drew you into battle. I wanted justice, and battle, unfortunately, became the only way I could get it. You and your men were caught in the crossfire, Margaery said helpfully. Robb nodded. Exactly. Doran rubbed his jaw and the soft, well-trimmed beard that he kept. He had a thoughtful expression of his face as he considered Robb's offer. Oberyn had already crossed his arms and leant back in his seat, ready to accept whatever his brother's answer was. Oberyn then was looking at Robb with a curious look that was a mix of intrigue and amusement. With anyone else, I would worry about how you might take back your word. Doran said finally, You are many things, Robb Stark, but you are first and foremost the son of Eddard Stark, and that counts for quite a bit. Robb smiled slightly. Thank you, my lord. I believe that means that you are agreeing to my offer. I am, Doran said, nodding. Is that all? Robb shook his head. There is one more proposition I would like to broach, if you would indulge me. Doran nodded. As I am about to take the Iron Throne, I would like for Dorne to have a say in Westeros' rule, Robb explained. I would very much like for Prince Oberyn, and all his children and his paramour, if he wishes, to stay in the capital as the emissary of Dorne. You said no hostages, Oberyn growled. And you won't be one, Robb replied calmly. Dorne still keeps its independence under Prince Doran's rule. My only wish is for Dorne to have a voice here. And between you and me, my lords and lady, I do not want a politician. I want a man who will tell me the harsh truth. Oberyn and Robb gazed at each other. The Northern King could feel that the Red Viper was close to accepting. He just needed one more push. He was a man who loved his people and his family. I will allow Dorne to keep its independence, Robb said, turning to Prince Doran. A simple oath of loyalty is all that I will require. All taxes and such will be paid to House Martell. I would like there to be constant communication between King's Landing and Sunspear. Allies, not strangers. Marguerite put simply. Doran nodded slowly. That is a very generous offer. I wonder how your generals feel about it. This offer is for the good of Westeros, not to appease anyone. Robb said firmly, I would have your answer. Doran glanced at Oberyn, who was still gazing at Robb. Eventually he met his brother's gaze and nodded once. "We accept your grace," Doran said simply. "Line break, your grace, they're here," Brienne said, poking her head through the cracked door. Robb nodded and gestured to his commander to let them in. 3 men were escorted in by the giant woman. Not that any would like to try and fight the warrior woman. "Your grace, Tyrion Lannister, Bronn, and Podrick Payne," she said. Robb nodded and motioned for the men to take the seats across from Robb. "Welcome, gentlemen." "Wine?" Tyrion smiled slightly. "Perhaps just a little, your grace." Robb poured the wine, a very good red wine vintage from the Reach, into 3 chalices, distributing them out to the chairs in front of him. When all 3 took their seats, Robb retook his. "I wish to thank you for your help, my lord," Robb said. "Yours and Willows's work was life-saving." "So I heard," Tyrion chuckled, raising his glance to Robb. "Ian Dragoneye is the talk of the town." Robb smiled slightly. "I'm sure you figured out that I did not call you here to praise you for your help with the dragons." "I had a feeling," Tyrion said with a shrug. "Thankfully, I will not have to wait long. You Northerners do not usually beat around the bush." Robb's smile grew. "The first issue I would like to bring up is in the Westerlands. Casterly Rock." "I take it?" Tyrion said. Robb nodded. "Indeed. Your cousin, Davin, I believe, has held out quite admirably against Randyll Tarly. But enough is enough. The war is over, and Tarly leaves the day after tomorrow to take back command of the siege. Believe me, Lord Tyrion, it may take months or years, but Tarly will bring the rock to heel." Tyrion shrugged, taking a drink of his wine. "Will he? Forgive my arrogance, but the rock hasn't fallen in hundreds of years. It's well stocked and defended." Robb nodded. "So it seems, but I believe that there is a simpler way to finish the campaign in the West." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you are Tywin Lannister's last surviving heir, are you not?" Robb asked. "The rock belongs to you." Tyrion scoffed. "My father never publicly acknowledged me as his heir. For all I know, he left the rock to Davin or Stafford." Margaery frowned. "You are the last remaining male of your line. Surely Tywin must have acknowledged that." "My cousin cannot rule Highgarden before Wellas or Garlane," she pointed out. Tyrion nodded to her. "Yes, but my father has always had a particular hatred for me. I wouldn't put it past him to do such a thing. Nevertheless, he has not publicly announced his heir, so we must assume that Casterly Rock falls to you," Robb said. "You and your friends here will travel with Tarly and have Davin hand over the rock." Tyrion scoffed. "He'd rather fall on his sword than hand over the castle to your men." Robb shook his head. "I do not want him to hand the rock to me. He is to hand it to you so that you become the new lord of Casterly Rock." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "In name only, I suppose." "I suspect you have numerous others lining up to become lord of the Westerlands." Robb shrugged, passing over a folder to Tyrion, who opened it and began reading it. "That is a list of titles and the new lords of the Westerlands." Robb explained. "Many died, and I've had my friend Samwell go over the most current list of families, as well as the deaths in the war. Furthermore, Tommen shall become your heir. I had a moment to see him once again when he was handed over to me from the Targaryens. He's young and naive, but he should do fine as your heir." "You're giving Tarly land sport," Tyrion interrupted. Looking up, Robb nodded. "Included in that folder is how our new government shall be formed. Each Lord Paramount shall have a council similar to my own to help govern. You yourself shall be named Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, a primarily political role, one you should be well suited for if the rumors are true. As for Randyll Tarly, he shall be named Warden in the Westerlands, the military counterpart to the Lord Paramount. He shouldn't interfere with your work. I have a job for him that will keep him quite busy," he explained easily. Tyrion nodded slowly, his eyes quickly scanning over the details of the new form of government. He seemed impressed, which made Robb proud. Margaery and Olenna had worked hard to put the system together, and Robb was surprised that it had not already been introduced.
"I see,"
Tyrion said. Robb turned to Bronn, who was pouring himself another glass of wine and looked quite bored with the meeting. "I have even found a place for your friend Bronn. I have spoken to the Hound, and he has no wish to take over the lordship of his family. Therefore I am able to offer the place to you, Bronn." The sellsword raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. "Sure. I must admit, your grace, This is well done, Tyrion said, closing the folder. I am rather surprised others haven't come up with it already. I mean to bring good change throughout the realm, and I intend to start as soon as possible, Robb answered, standing up to walk over to a nearby table where a small collection of items sat. He picked one up, putting his back to Tyrion as he spoke. As an experienced politician, would you not say that it is like war? Tyrion raised an eyebrow, glancing towards the queen, who was regarding the imp with a curious look. He looked back at Robb, who still hadn't turned around. He nodded. I suppose so. When I first fought your brother at the Whispering Wood, I took a risk. When I traveled south to treat with Renly Baratheon, I took a risk. After your father defeated me at Harrenhal, and I made a stand at High Heart, I took a risk. When I met the Targaryens in open combat, I took a risk. War is won through risks, and I have taken many to get to where I am now, he explained, turning around finally. He tossed what was in his hand towards Tyrion, who caught it. He looked down and was unable to hold back his surprise as he found himself looking at the hand of the kingpin, the very same one he had worn for months while his father had fought the young wolf in the Riverlands. He looked up, meeting Robb's clear blue eyes. Why? He asked, the only word that came to his mind. My brother and sister both spoke well for you, Robb responded, retaking his seat. Jon said that you were witty and sarcastic, but also quite realistic. Sansa spoke very highly of you, how you defended her from Joffrey and generally kept the capital together as Cersei and her son tried their best to tear it apart. Willis has praised your intelligence to the stars. My other allies, and indeed my wife, are very skeptical of the appointment. But I am taking a risk, he said, leaning forward, gazing steadily at Tyrion. Did I make the right one? Line break. Robb and his wife sat around the table with 8 men, some of which were enemies just a few days ago. Robb and Margaery had been very careful on where they placed each man. Robb's father was placed on Robb's right, and the rest followed in this order. Doran Martell, Roderick Harlaw, Tyrion Lannister, Wellis Tyrell, Harold Arryn, Edmure Tully, and finally Lord Bryce Caron sat on Margaery's left, while the Queen herself sat on Robb's left. Robb had to be very particular where each man sat. He had employed his 2 most level-headed men, his father and Wellis, to bookend the area where his former enemies had sat. Normally it would have been unwise to place a man of the Reach next to an Ironborn, but Wellis had managed it with exceptional grace, as he always does. My lords, thank you for joining me today, Robb said, standing up to start the meeting. I have called you all here today because I require your assistance as we put the realm back together. There are vacancies that need to be addressed in each realm, and I would hear your thoughts on who should fill them. We understand that this is the job of Lord Paramount's, Margaery said, adding her voice to her husband's. This is how the meeting will be conducted. The king will go around the table, asking each lord if there are seats that need to be filled, and who they believe will fill them. Robb nodded. Instead of meeting with you all individually, I have decided to see it all done in one meeting, he explained. I understand that we are not all friends, he said, glancing towards Harlaw, Tyrion and Doran, but I expect there to be civility among you all, regardless of past deeds. Am I understood? A murmur of agreement went around the table as Robb retook his seat, gesturing to his father. Father, please. Eddard nodded. Robb had already sent notes to all men present to have a list of names already written down for who will take up what seat. Then, when Robb holds his first court, the positions will be officially announced. Thankfully, most of the seats are easy to fill, thanks to the company of the Rose. Eddard said, the Dreadfort, Barrowtown, and the Rills shall go to Danis Dustin, Maxar Bolton, and Carson Ryder. Ryder? Edmure asked curiously. I thought the Reswells ruled the Rills? House Ryder was an extinct northern house. Tyrion explained. It seems many of the once extinct northern houses have stayed alive through the company. Eddard nodded to the dwarf. Lord Tyrion is correct. House Reswell was formed after the arrival of House Targaryen, and such were never part of the creation of the company. Is there anything else, father? Robb asked. Because of the mysterious disappearance of my son Bran, the title of heir falls to my youngest, Rickon. My cousin Darren shall take up the position as Master of Mo, Kylan, and Daisy Mormont shall become Lady of Bear Island. For House Whitehill, their male line was killed during the storming of the Dreadfort, leaving only Gwyn Whitehill as the only surviving member of her house. Asher Forrester, second son of Lord Gregor Forrester, will take her for wife and take High Point as his seat. What about the other families that have returned with the Company of the Rose? Harold asked curiously. For Umbers, Mormonts, Karstarks, and all others, they shall return to their family home, and I will leave the current lords to decide what will be done with their newly returned cousins. For the once extinct houses like Red Starks, Grey Starks, and Fishers, I shall find them castles and seats in the north close to where they once ruled. Eddard explained, they will be run-down holdfasts, but thankfully the company has saved up a lot of gold, and will be able to rebuild these castles back to their former glory. Robb nodded. Perfect, he said, looking towards Prince Doran. Prince Doran, if you'd please. The partially crippled prince nodded. I have only a few changes, your grace. Crystalus Eronwood shall take up his role as Lord of Euronwood, after the death of his father Anders. Other than that, all the lords of the Dorne remain intact. The only seat that remains a concern is Starfall. Why is that? Wellis asked. The Lord of Starfall died during the war, before Daenerys Targaryen ever set foot on Westeros. He was an old man. His son, Edric, was a squire for Lord Dondarrion, who has also disappeared. Beric's master-at-arms rallied the men of Blackhaven when Renly called his banners. Bryce Curran added, We never knew what happened to the man himself. I sent him to lead a group to arrest the mountain. Eddard said quietly, I know not what happened. I was betrayed and arrested after they left. The Brotherhood without banners. Edmure said, Lord Beric must be leading them. Lord Dane might be with them. Septic with Sir Brendan. Catching the Brotherhood must now be a main priority, Robb said, nodding to his uncle. He turned to Prince Doran. If Lord Edric is alive, then I will have him sent to Starfall to take up his place as Lord. If he is not, then I will leave you to decide who shall take over the castle. If I may, your grace, if the boy is not alive, what will happen to Dawn? Eddard asked carefully. Prince Doran rubbed his jaw. That is a good question, Lord Stark. I will think most carefully on this. May I ask why you are curious? Sir Heir was a great man, Eddard explained. One of the finest swords of the morning. I would hate to see the blade fall to a man who is unworthy of wielding it. I share your concern, Lord Stark, Doran said. But the decision must wait until we determine what has happened to Edric Dane. Eddard nodded, ending the conversation. Robb looked between the two men, making they had nothing else to say before going on to the next man. Lord Roderick, it is your turn, Robb said. The man known as the Reader nodded. Denise Drum will take up his seat of Old Wyke, he started, glancing towards Robb. He thought about stealing his ancestral sword back, but I persuaded the lad against it. Dinston lost the sword through combat, and the boy had to understand that. I appreciate that. The sword is now in the hands of one of my most capable warriors. I would hate for someone to die doing something stupid, Robb said. Roderick nodded. Other than that, there is nothing else. My one question is, what will happen to Asha Greyjoy? All eyes turned to Robb, whose gaze rested firmly on Roderick Harlaw. She will be released, he said finally. Harold Arryn frowned. I mean no offense, your grace, but is that wise? Eddard nodded. The girl is currently residing in a cell at Deepwood Motte. She followed her father's orders, but she also had honor. Sibel Glover and her children are only alive because of Ashasha Greyjoy. The Greyjoys are no longer rulers of the Iron Islands, Robb explained. Asha Greyjoy will be Lady of Pike, but Lord Paramount and Warden of the Iron Islands fall to Roderick and his heir, Ser Harris. Roderick nodded. I have nothing else, your grace. What will happen to the Iron Fleet? Lord Caron asked curiously. As per the kings, the Iron Fleet has been separated and destroyed. Avila explained. All crews and captains have been forced to give up their ships, most of which have gone over to House Redwine to rebuild their fleet. The rest are going to the north, he said, looking at Lord Stark to finish. The remaining longships shall go the Fishers, Hawkers, and Mormonts. Father explained. Robb nodded. Lord Tyrion, you are next, Robb said, moving down the table. The little lord glanced at the parchment in front of him before addressing the table. I'm not sure if his grace has said, but Lance Award has been gifted to Lord Randall Tarley to take as his seat. He will also be taking on the title of Warden of the Westerlands. Everyone nodded, accepting the fact. Robb had made sure to disperse proper information to his Lord Paramounts about how the new ruling structure would work. Lord Paramounts would handle the day-to-day problems of governance, while wardens would deal with military problems and lead armies. In most cases, Lord Paramounts and wardens were the same person. The only places where that wasn't the case was the Reach, Westerlands, Stormlands, and Dorne. In the Reach, Willis was Lord Paramount, while Garland was warden. In the Stormlands, Lord Param was warden while Sarah Courtney Penrose was acting Lord Paramount, until Edric Storm, now Edric Baratheon, is old enough to take on both responsibilities. And in Dorne, Robb allowed them to keep their government independence. Robb glanced around the table, happy that the government that Margaery and he had created was so widely accepted. "Please continue, my lord," he said, gesturing to Tyrion. "Sindor Clegane has refused to take over Clegane Keep, and so my friend Bronn, a sellsword, under my employ, shall be taking that as his seat. As for the other houses, Tydos Brax is now Lord of Hornvale, Adam Marbrand is Lord of Ashamark, and other than that, there is nothing else." "Lord Wellis," Robb said, pleased that things were going so smoothly. Margaery's brother nodded. "Thank you, your grace. With Lord Randall's departure, his son Dickon has been raised to Lord of Hornhill." He looked back over his notes once more before nodding. "That should do it. My one question is the Florence. Axel and Alistair are still imprisoned in Highgarden, and I believe that there are a few more currently imprisoned in Riverrun." Edmure nodded. "A few cousins who survived the Battle of High Heart," he confirmed. Robb scratched his jaw. "I will have them all sent to the wall," he decided. Willis frowned. "What of their wives, your grace? And Alekine Florent, Alistair's son. One of my protectors is Sar Parman Crane, whom I believe is related to Alistair's wife. Perhaps the boy can squire for the night, and his mother may go back to Red Lake." Margaery answered. Robb nodded. "A wonderful idea," he said happily. "The wives and families of Alistair and Axel, as well as the cousins at Riverrun, may go back to their original house." Wellas nodded, making a small note. "Of course, your grace. Who will receive Brightwater?" "Garlan," Robb said firmly. "He's more than earned it." Wellas couldn't help but smile a little. "Of course, your grace," he said, happily. "That is all." Robb turned to Harold. "Lord Arryn, please," he said, gesturing to the young lord. Harold glanced at the table, clearing his throat. "Of course," he said, "with the death of Lord Horton, the Red Fort falls to his heir." "Sari Jasper," he said slowly. "That is all, your grace." Robb nodded, smiling. "Thank you, my lord. Lord Edmure, you are next." Edmure nodded happily. "Thank you, your grace," he said. "Fortunately, most of my bannermen get to return home. Unfortunately, the two houses currently without a leader are House Bracken and House Frey. Lord Jonos only had daughters, and most of House Frey has been sent to the wall by my uncle, leaving Sarah Nolan Rivers as castellan of the castle. I believe I have an answer for the Freys," Reb said. "Olivar Frey is still in my service. I will no doubt knight him soon. I very much like for him to have a worthy match when he takes up as Lord of the Twins." "Miranda Royce might be a good match, my lord," Harold offered. "She is the daughter of Sarah Nestor, the Knight of the Gate." "Wasn't she married?" Edmure asked. Harold hesitated, but Eddard stepped in. "She was," he replied. "But he was an old man who died on their wedding night. The maesters say that his heart just stopped. She is still young and quite lively, if Yolan is right." Robb nodded. "I will talk with Oliver about this, but Miranda Royce will be kept in mind," he promised. "My lords, if I may," Margaery said, "I believe I may have a solution for House Bracken. Lucas Blackwood, the second son of Lord Tydos. If he were to marry Lord Bracken's eldest daughter, then that would mend the rift between the two houses." Edmure grinned at the Queen. "An excellent idea, your grace," he praised. "If Lucas were to take on the name Bracken, then all would be fixed." "Except Lucas on this? Would you, uncle?" Robb asked. "This would be a momentous occasion, and Lucas is a great man." Edmure nodded. "Of course, your grace. I will speak to him at once." Robb turned to the final man, Lord Caron. Technically, he was not Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, but because Edric Storm was too young, he was the next best option.
"There is not much to say, your grace," he admitted.
Lord Gullion Swan died in his bed sometime during the war, but Sarah Donnell can easily step in and take his father's place. Aemon Estermont is now Lord of Greenstone, with the planned legitimization of Edric Storm, that only leaves Blackhaven without a lord. Lord Caron explained. Did Lord Dondarrion have any nephews or brothers that we know about? Robb asked. Lord Caron shook his head. He was an only child, I'm afraid. Lady Elaria, Beric's betrothed, is currently Lady of Blackhaven, but she was never married to Beric, nor had any children with him. Robb tapped the table thoughtfully. An unfortunate case, to be sure, he muttered. He looked at Margaery. Do you have any thoughts, my dear? Margaery nodded slowly. If Lord Dondarrion is found dead, why not legitimize Lady Elaria as Lady of Blackhaven and allow her to take on the Dondarrion name? If we allow her to remarry, then the House of Dondarrion can continue. Caron nodded. A sound plan, Your Grace, he said respectfully. Margaery graced the Stormlord with a pleasant smile. Thank you, my lord. Are there any issues in the Crownlands that need to be addressed? Lord Tyrion asked, looking at Robb. What of Dragonstone? Edmure asked. Robb shared a look with Margaery, who nodded back. Robb sighed and looked around the table at the faces staring back at him. I intend to give it to Daenerys Targaryen. Everyone around the table, save for Robb's father and wife, were in utter disbelief. Robb had just fought a massive battle with the woman, and now he wanted to give her a castle. Your Grace, Edmure said, struggling for words. This is... I know exactly what it is, Uncle, Robb said, cutting him off. I understand what you all are thinking, but allow me to explain. First and foremost, Jon Conington tried to have me killed. Daenerys had nothing to do with that. Second, he said, looking towards Doran Martell. Prince Doran, is there any madness within the girl? You've spent the most time with her than anyone at this table. The Prince of Dorne shook his head. I saw no traces of insanity, Your Grace. Dorne would not have supported her and her nephew if we had. Robb nodded. I believe that Daenerys is a good person, and although her family has lost the right to rule Westeros, Dragonstone still belongs to her family. Just as Winterfell belongs to mine and Casterly Rock belongs to the Lannisters. The dragons are another reason. We cannot keep them in the Godswood. You want to set them free as well? Tyrion asked. Margaery nodded. On Dragonstone, they would have a lot of space to fly and hunt away from civilization. And when they grow? Bryce Caron asked. Daenerys will not be able to stay alive long enough to ride dragons like the Conqueror had. Willis explained. Her dragons now are just a few years old. Robb leaned forward. My lords, please understand, I will have a long talk with Daenerys about many things. First and foremost is that if her dragons kill any innocent soul, then they will die. Second is that she no longer has a claim to the Iron Throne, or Westeros. That claim was destroyed, thanks to the actions of Aerys, Rhaegar and Conington. Is a second chance the best choice, Your Grace? Harold asked. Robb turned to Tyrion, who was watching the king with a thoughtful and intrigued expression. I am taking a risk, he said, but I cannot blame the child for the crimes of their father. Tyrion nodded, understanding what Robb was hinting at. Robb looked around the room. Perhaps by the end of her life, Daenerys can turn around her house and leave a better legacy than what she was left with. Doran coughed. If I may add, Your Grace, I am afraid the girl can't give birth, he said awkwardly. All eyes instantly turned to Doran, who was looking down at his hands in shame. It was obvious that he was hesitant to give up any more information, but he had started and now he had to continue. How did this happen? Eddard asked. Doran shook his head. There was an incident in Essos, if Varys is correct, but I am not sure. All I know is that she has lost the ability to conceive. Robb resisted the urge to look at his father. They both knew the truth. Everyone believed that Daenerys was the last Targaryen, and indeed the girl thought it too. No one except for Robb, his father, Howland, Samwell, and Jon knew the truth. We will wait and keep an eye on how this develops. But for now, let's give the girl a chance, Robb said slowly. With the matter settled, Robb looked around the room. Daenerys will become Lady of Dragonstone. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed before we convene the meeting? I believe we are done for the day. All I ask is that you deliver official list to my steward, so that I can announce the changes at court tomorrow. Robb said when no one said anything, I will also announce the King's Council, King's Guard, and other such positions. The line break. Your Graces, he's here, Brienne said. Robb and Margus shared a glance before Robb gestured for Brienne to show the man in. When the large woman brought the hooded figure in, Robb nodded again to his captain. "Please, stay Brienne," Robb asked. "Sir Balon will be fine outside." The man chuckled. "Do you think so highly of me, young wolf?" he asked, his voice gruff, with just a hint of arrogance. The man removed his hood to reveal a dirty, haggard face. His beard had grown full, and his hair had become shaggy and tangled. The mud and dirt from the dungeons of Riverrun had turned the man's hair dark blonde, but the eyes, those he could never change. They were still bright green, like emeralds, full of confidence and amusement. On his face was the same smirk he had when he rode into Winterfell all those years ago. Sir Jaime looked far different than when Robb had seen him in Winterfell and at the Whispering Wood, but from the looks of it his personality hadn't changed at all. He was still the arrogant Golden Knight, the man forever known as the Kingslayer. "You still have both your hands, Kingslayer," Robb pointed. "I wouldn't trust you with a spoon." Sir Jaime laughed. "There's that vaunted Stark hospitality. That's saved for people who didn't try to kill my brother." Robb growled, "Sit." The Lannister knight pulled a seat back and sat down, his eyes landing on the wine pitcher. "Can I bother you for some wine?" "No," Robb answered immediately, glancing down at a piece of parchment before looking back up. "Your brother made a plea for your life. Normally I would have you beheaded for fucking your sister alone. Attempted murder of my brother and attacking my father unprovoked just furthers the list of your crimes. Did you drag me all the way from Riverrun to read me a list of my sins, Stark, or do you have something you actually want to say to me?" he asked boredly, although there was a dangerous light in his eyes. Robb glared at the tarnished knight, but held his anger in check. "The only reason you are here is because your brother did something for me, and this is me returning the favor," he explained. "Furthermore, you will be the first to hear, your brother shall become Lord of Casterly Rock and Lord Paramount of the Westerlands. Tommen shall be his heir." Jaime nodded, not looking all that surprised with the news. "Good," he said quietly, all the arrogance he previously had now gone. "Tyrion deserves it more than Cersei or I ever did. Tommen will be a good heir and will become a good lord under Tyrion's guidance." Robb raised an eyebrow. The sincerity in the knight's voice was obvious. "Tyrion will take the title of Lord Paramount, while the military title of Warden shall go to another." Jaime once again nodded. "Smart. Tyrion's biggest advantage has always been his mind, not his sword arm. That was always my talent." Robb shared a look with Margaery before continuing. "With that out of the way, I brought you here to ask you 2 questions. The first, why did you kill the Mad King?" Yeah, he shrugged. "You knew the tales of the man. Was that not reason enough?" he asked, his voice bitter now, as he was reminded of his most infamous achievement. "Understandable, but rumors are that you killed him on your father's command," Margaery said. "We would hear the truth from you." Jaime gazed at the queen, and for the first time he allowed his true self to show. He was a broken man, who had spent the entirety of the war wallowing in the cells of Riverrun, defeated at the onset of the war by the young wolf, and was only allowed to sit and think of how low his reputation had dropped in the last 20 years. In that time, his failures as a man, a knight, a Kingsguard were all he had to think about. It had left him bitter and angry with himself. "You want to know why I killed that madman? This is why. Aerys Targaryen raped his wife, after every time he burned a man. Daenerys Targaryen is a spawn of rape. I watched that man kill and rape at his pleasure, and while my knightly vows told me to defend the weak, fight back against tyranny, my vows as a Kingsguard prevented me from doing a damn thing. We are sworn to defend the king, not judge him. That is what Severgold Hightower said to me after the burning of your grandfather." Targaryen snarled. "At the end of the rebellion, while my father was sacking the city and the mountain was killing the royal family, do you know what the Mad King did? He sent his hand, a pyromancer named Rossart, to ignite wildfire caches that he had set out throughout the city. Under each gate, under each main road, under the great sept and dragon pit. The man was going to blow the city to hell and take everyone with it. The man probably thought was going to be able to turn himself into a dragon or some other sort of madness. When I saw the king give the order, I followed Rossart out of the room and put my sword through his back. When I came back in the room, I put my sword through Aerys' back as well. I broke my vow for the most honorable of reasons. I saved 500,000 people, the populace alone, and your father called me Kingslayer." Targaryen roared, standing slightly. Brienne stepped forward, half drawing her blade, but Robb held up a hand to stop her. Garbishaimerod continued, his voice coming back to a normal volume. That, my lady, is why I killed the Mad King. Aerys was going to blow up the city, Marjorie said, the blood draining from her face. Did you ever say anything? Ariel shook his head. No, it would cause a mass panic. Besides, it deteriorates, he said, trying to find the word. Deteriorates? Robb offered. Jaime nodded. That one. Marjorie shook her head sadly. No, it doesn't. It grows more unstable as time goes on. Robb glanced at his wife. You're saying there's barrels of wildfire hidden in the city? The fear in Marjorie's eyes told the young king all he needed to know. Robb shot to his feet. Darabalan, he shouted. The Stormlander knight burst into the room, his sword drawn. Robb held up a hand to stall the man. Get Lady Olenna, my father, Varys, and Lord Tyrion, he ordered. Get Willis as well, along with any maester you can find, and the leader of the Pyromancery Guild, Marjorie added. Immediately, the knight nodded and ran off, running as fast as his feet could carry him. Marjorie put her hand on Robb's, looking up at him. Robb turned to Brienne. Brienne, he said, his voice brokering no room for argument. Send word out to the army and have them ready to move. Have word spread throughout the city to have them ready to leave. Prepare as many ships as we can. Marjorie shook her head. We can't do that, Robb, she said. We can't cause a panic, not now. Let us try to resolve this before we do anything rash.
You said so yourself.
The wildfire could... He tried to argue, but Marjorie squeezed his hand, stopping him. It's been hidden for over 20 years. It can wait another day. But we need to know if we can get it taken care of first. She pressed. Robb looked into her eyes, the two sharing a silent debate which Marjorie won. The young wolf nodded, and slowly retook his seat. Fine, he said quietly, turning his attention back to Sarai. We will deal with the wildfire situation, he said. But I have one other question. The Kingslayer seemed to be in shock over the wildfire scare. For years, the only consolation that he had when he killed the Mad King was that he saved the city from being blown up. As it turns out, he had put the city under a suspension of death. Sarahani, Robb snapped, you made a mistake. Now get over it. The Kingslayer shook his head, gazing unnervingly at Robb. What? Robb glanced at Brienne and gestured to the door. Hold anyone outside. This will only be a moment, he ordered. The large woman nodded and walked out, closing the door behind her. Marjorie glanced at her husband, curious to see what he had to ask the man. You said that you didn't know which vow to uphold, your knightly vows or your vows as a Kingsguard. I want to know, should they be one and the same? Robb asked.
Jaime's head snapped up. Now alert! What do you mean?
Robb gestured towards the door. After hearing your story, I want to make sure there is never a chance where a Kingsguard is forced to pick between the innocent and his king. What I am asking is, should a Kingsguard be able to kill his king if for the betterment of the realm?
Marjorie grabbed Robb's arm, but the young wolf had his gaze firmly fixed on the Kingslayer, who was meeting the young man's gaze. You would allow your sworn swords to defy you.
Robb nodded. I never want to put them in a position where they are forced to choose between vows, he explained. You broke your vow to your king to uphold your oath as a knight. Yeah, Jaime nodded slowly. I see. I was a part of what might have been the greatest Kingsguard ever assembled. Sir Barristan the Bold. Sir Brisan the Bold. Sir Roald Hightower. Prince Lewin Martell. Sir Arthur Dane. The Sword in the Morning. And then I was a member of what could be considered the worst collection of Kingsguard in over 300 years. Most of them were political appointments for Cersei, knights under her employee, men like Meryn Trent and Preston Greenfield. There were a few good ones, Oakheart and more, but it was a terrible group of men. The knight had a far-off look in his eye as he spoke about the various knights he had been around. I will give you this, Stark. Line break. The sky outside had turned from light blue to shades of orange and purple as the sun set, and the night emerged. Robb and Marjorie had been sitting in the chambers all day, meeting with all sorts of groups. Their last meeting had been rushed, but it had to be. Varys, Tyrion and Samwell Tarly would begin immediate work on locating the wildfire, along with finding ways to destroy it. Robb's father, Wellis, and others would help tomorrow. Robb needed them once more before the night was out. The door opened suddenly, allowing Daenerys Targaryen, followed by Barristan Selmy and Jorah Mormont, to walk in. Both knights wore normal clothes and were completely unarmed. Daenerys herself wore a cream-colored dress and had the same silver dragon choker around her throat. "Robb," she said simply, standing across from him. "Please sit," Robb said quietly. "I have troubling news. It involves your father," he said, nodding to Daenerys. The silver-haired girl gave Robb a bored, exasperated look. "What great sin have you accused him of now?" Robb glared at her. "Your father planned on blowing up King's Landing," he said bluntly. "He had barrels of wildfire planted underneath the city. On the day Tywin Lannister sacked the city, Aerys ordered the head of the Pyromancers Guild to ignite the barrels." Daenerys went to say something, but Robb held up a hand to stop her. "I have already tasked my allies with securing the barrels," Robb continued. "Every precaution will be taken to ensure the safety of the citizens of this city, my men and the prisoners." Daenerys nodded slowly. It was obvious that she was trying to overcome her shock in order to keep the conversation going. Thankfully, Settra Barristan stepped in and asked the question that Daenerys was going to. "Why have you called us here, my lord?" he asked politely. "With the Khans and Conington's death, that leaves only Daenerys," Robb said. "The sellswords, the Dornish, and the Crownlanders have all laid down their swords and surrendered fully to myself. The remaining companies will be sent back to Essos. The Crownlanders and the Dornish will be allowed home without repercussions. All that leaves is your Unsullied." "How many are left?" Daenerys asked quietly. "About 500, Robb answered. "Once my men broke their ranks, it didn't go well." "So what are you going to do?" Daenerys asked bitterly. "Am I your war trophy?" Robb couldn't help but have flashbacks of his fight with Aegon. Those had been his exact same words, and the way in which they were spoken was uncanny. The bitterness of defeat was obvious. It was as if they felt like a rare animal about to be caged and put in display. Robb had no intention of caging anyone. "You had no part in the attempt on myself or my son," Robb said, keeping his voice neutral. "Your only fault was backing your nephew, and even then, it's understandable. So if you are wondering whether I will have you killed or imprisoned, the answer is no." "No?" Daenerys said, not sounding convinced. Robb shook his head. "I am not Tywin Lannister, nor am I Robert Baratheon. I do not hate you for who you are, and I do not want to kill you, because you fought against me." "What will be done with me then?" Daenerys asked. "You will be given Dragonstone," Robb said. "You, the 2 knights by your side, your Unsullied, and your dragons will be allowed to take the island as your own." But Robb held up a hand. "I require something from you." "What?" Daenerys asked. "An oath of fealty," Robb said firmly, "and a promise that you will not leave your island for 5 years. You are asking me to give up my crown, my claim to the throne, and to accept a prison sentence where I am a prisoner in my own home." Daenerys said, summarizing Robb's words. "What if I say no?" "Your dragons are dead," Robb replied immediately. "The Unsullied will be deported back to Astapor, and every supporter you have will be sent to the wall or executed." Robb hated himself as the words came out, but he knew that it was the only way to convince Daenerys to agree to his first offer. He knew how much her dragons meant to her, and he was well aware of her relationship with the eunuch warriors and her knights. They were all she had left now, after the battle. Even her Dothraki had been wiped out to the last man. "Those are your 2 choices, Daenerys," Robb said. "Believe me when I say that I am being generous. There is no one else inside the castle or even within 100 miles of the city that wants those dragons alive. But I will warn you now." Robb leaned forward. "If you lose control of your dragons, I will not hesitate to kill them. We both know it's possible." Daenerys leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. Her mouth was screwed shut in an angry line, but Robb had intentionally placed her between a rock and a hard place. She and her remaining followers and dragons would remain alive, but confined to an island that was limited with resources. "How do I know that I can trust you?" Daenerys asked, finally. "Because anyone else wouldn't be giving you this option," Robb said. "You're a good person, Daenerys. You have good people advising you. You believed in peace as much as I did. What I'm doing now, it's all in the name of peace." The last Targaryen looked at the knights on either side of her. Ser Shira looked sour, but didn't seem opposed to the offer. "Sero Barristan," on the other hand, seemed relieved that Robb wasn't going to kill the girl. "I would have your answer," Robb said. Line break. Robb was in his final meeting of the day, and it was the one he was more nervous about, even more so than the Martells and Daenerys. He was surrounded by the smartest people he knew. Welles, Olenna, his father, and as always, Marchi was at his side. "Thank you all for coming," Robb said tiredly, running a hand through his hair. He was amongst family, and knew that he could drop the facade of a strong king, just a bit. "I understand that it is late, but I would hear your opinions." Welles nodded. "Of course," he said easily. "How can we help?" Marguerite placed her hand over Robb's, squeezing it. Reassuringly, the young king picked up a report from in front of him and passed it to his father, who sat on his right. "These are who I plan on naming to my council and my Kingsguard." Robb's father looked over the list, nodding slightly as he saw who would be given a white cloak. It was when he reached the king's council and saw the first name written, did he stop and stare at Robb, stunned. "Robb?" But the young wolf waved aside his father's question. "Keep reading and pass it along. I will answer questions after everyone has seen my decisions." Eddard sighed and quickly looked over the rest of the list before passing it along to Lady Olenna, who looked at both Robb and his father before looking over the sheet, not showing any response to the names listed. After passing it to her grandson, did she put both hands on the top of her cane, sighing as well. That made two people who did not look all that pleased with the list. And Robb knew that it was one name that made them question the entire thing. Welles raised an eyebrow when he went over the list, but said nothing. He alone didn't look all that fazed by the list, which didn't surprise Robb. Welles had always been one of the more open-minded men Robb had ever come across. When he gave the list to Marguerite, she put it face down on the table, folding her free hand in her lap as all eyes were on Robb, who was leaning on the armrest of his chair, gazing at the table. "Robb, are you sure?" Father asked finally. Robb nodded slowly. "I am," he said. "Father, you always told me that to be a good ruler, I had to put the best people in the positions I needed them. I'm doing that." Eddard sighed. "Robb, you're going to name Tyrion Lannister as your hand. What are the repercussions?" "What are the repercussions if I don't?" Robb asked, looking around the table. "If there was anyone else, then I would take them, but there's not." "Well," as Robb said, turning to his good brother, "you are the only man capable of matching Tyrion's intellect, but you are needed in the Reach." Willis nodded. "I appreciate the compliment, Your Grace, but I do not share Lord Stark's apprehensions. I spent the last few days with Lord Tyrion, and can say that he is possibly the best man, besides his late father, to be Hand of the King in quite some time," he said, nodding to Lord Stark. "No offense." Eddard waved aside the apology. "It's all right," he said. "I was not meant for the South. I will not lie. Your Grace, Lord Tyrion is smart. Amazingly so, with a mind for politics. I will not withhold praise from my sister and grandmother, who will also be on your council, but Lord Tyrion is just as smart as they are and twice as ruthless. Let us be honest with ourselves. That will be needed here." Willis continued.
"What about Casterly Rock?"
Marguerite asked, looking at Robb. Robb shook his head. "Tommen will be fine with the help of whomever Tyrion leaves, as Castellan. After all, Tyrion ruled for 2 decades with the Mad King." He looked around the table. "Are there any other appointments that should be further looked at?" Eddard shook his head. "Your Kingsguard is solid," he said. "Good, honorable knights one and all. Brienne, as your Lord Commander, will be odd to others, but I can think of none better. I see shades of Barristan Selmy in her. The others are used to taking orders from her as well. That power dynamic is already in place, thankfully." Lady Olenna nodded. "Indeed. The others on your council are good choices as well. Lady Anya is an interesting choice for Master of Coin, as is Alec Reed." "Alec Reed is the spy master for the Company of the Rose," Eddard explained. "His system is nearly as vast as the Spider's, and he's currently working on flipping as many of Baelish's sources as he can." "Welles was my first choice for Master of Coin," Robb said. "But as I've said, he's needed in the Reach. Lady Anya is highly favored amongst her countrymen, especially Lords Royce and the late Lord Redfort." "What of the Northerners?" Welles asked. "I saw that you had all the realms represented save for the Iron Islands and Dorne, for obvious reasons. The only Northerner I saw on your list was Ian Hawker, your captain of the Household Guard." Robb nodded. I will watch out for northern interest, he said. Besides, I doubt there's a northerner who would want to be here, not named Manderley. Gideon Hawker is a third son, and is known to be quite observant and quick-thinking. We believe that he will make a fine captain, Margaery explained. For Dorne and the Iron Islands, Prince Oberyn will remain in the capital to ensure that Dorne has a voice, even though it will remain somewhat independent from the Iron Throne. As for the Iron Islands, they have been decimated by the battles in the north, the Reach, and on the islands themselves. It will be years before Lord Harlaw can rebuild the islands. He means to make them more of a trading post in the Sunset Sea. Robb continued. When they gain more power, Margaery and I will take the necessary steps to maintain a firm hand on them. Well, your graces, Lady Olenna sighed. I must say I am rather intrigued to see how this works out. Robb smiled slightly. My lady, you helped put many of these changes in place. I have a feeling that everything will work out just fine.